Chapter 78. When faced with such a situation, even a clay figurine would get angry. Even if Su Lu was a rock, he had the word resentment engraved on it. What angered him the most was that he didn't even know what went wrong. How did the trees in the pear garden become covered with snow in one night? How did the two moons in the sky collide? How did day become night? How did the two people who were on good terms just a moment ago become strangers? Su Lu was a wild bull that he despised, but this was his first love. In the words that he never forgot to remind Zhang Xiaomeng, this was also his first night. It was impossible for his emotions to immediately brighten up, so when he shook hands with Hai Qingzhou, he subconsciously used more strength. Of course, his facial expression was still very good. Congratulations, congratulations. Shi Qinghai raised a large glass of beer and laughed at the unhappy Su Lu. He sincerely congratulated him. I've seen a lot of one-night stands, but a one-day boyfriend like you is really rare. His congratulations were sincere because he no longer had to worry about any problems between Zhang Xiaomeng and Su Lu. However, these words sounded like vicious mockery to Su Li's ears. He took a big gulp of beer and frowned. This situation is a little strange. I can't accept it. Did you and Zhang Xiaomeng sleep together? Shi Qinghai lit a cigarette and threw the cigarette box over. The problem was that this guy was really too handsome. No matter how sneaky he looked, it was impossible to dislike him. Su Lu was stunned. He immediately thought of that night when he saw the elf wearing the devil's horns. That beautiful and unforgettable time. However, from the perspective of a girl, he couldn't tell the truth to this bad friend in front of him. He shook his head. Shi Qinghai leaned back and sighed. I can't accept it. You know how I look at beautiful girls. If Zhang Xiaomeng didn't wear those black-rimmed glasses in bed, she would definitely be a beautiful little girl. What a pity, what a pity. When Su Lu heard this, he was a little annoyed. He glared at him angrily and took out a cigarette from the pack and lit it up. Shi Qinghai frowned and said, It seems that you are serious. But she only kissed you in the restaurant. That doesn't mean anything. Women are fickle. Maybe she will realize that you have no future after staying at home for 2 days. A sensitive woman will think that a man is riding a white horse when she sees him. But a rational woman will analyze whether the white horse is rented or bought, and whether the horse is pure or not. Regarding the matters between men and women, young Master Shi, as always, hit the nail on the head and was incomparably sharp. However, Su Lu did not listen to these words at all. He was carefully reflecting on his relationship with Zhang Xiaomeng in the past few days and why such a change had happened. Suddenly, he looked up and said, Xiaomeng likes me. Shi Qinghai was stunned for a moment and shook his head. He gave him a thumbs up and said, This is the first time I see you being narcissistic. It's just like how you used to smile obscenely. It's quite like me. Su Lu ignored him. He continued to frown and analyze while smoking. Since she likes me but doesn't want to admit our relationship, then it must be because of our relationship, which is a huge obstacle to something. Matters between men and women will only affect matters between men and women. Recently, she has the son of a senator around her. According to my sources, they got to know each other at a family gathering in the Zhang family. You have sources? Shi Qinghai looked at him in surprise. Su Lu said calmly, I used a pearl necklace to bribe the girl next to Xiaomeng. Continue, Xiaomeng is not a vain person. Even if she wants to be with that plain porridge and side dish, she would not be so stupid to choose such a method and such a time to end our relationship. If I make a scene. Su Lu did not mention what happened that night. If they were to really make things too unpleasant for both parties, this kind of thing would spread. It would be extremely harmful to the development of Zhang Xiaomeng and Hai Qingzhou's relationship. More importantly, I've only just started with her. Any normal woman would be an emotional woman at this time. In your words, she won't even notice what kind of white horse I'm riding. Continue. Shi Qinghai was obviously interested because he realized that Su Li's analysis was indeed reasonable. So she wants to be closer to Hai Qingzhou, not because she likes him, but because she needs to be closer to him during this period of time. Su Li's words were a bit awkward, but the logic was becoming clearer. His knife-like eyebrows raised, and his calm eyes looked past Shi Qinghai's face to look outside the bar. As for the reason, I am not very clear. Of course, you won't help me investigate. Alright, the Federation Investigation Bureau does not care about breakups. Su Lu suddenly frowned and said, last time at the entrance of the nightclub, Hai Qingzhou was with the Zhou family siblings. You once told me that Zhou Yu had already entered your university. Could it be that Zhang Xiaomeng wants to get close to Zhou Yu through Hai Qingzhou? But why does she want to get close to Zhou Yu? You said that Zhou Yu's father is a high-ranking official in the Ministry of National Defense. Oh my god. Could it be that Xiaomeng is really working for the anti-government forces? Shi Qinghai's heart trembled. He did not expect Su Lu to be able to deduce so many things randomly, but his expression did not change. He said mockingly, don't find so many strange reasons for yourself. This is too complicated. It's a pity that you don't work for the Federation Investigation Bureau. Those intelligence analysts only know how to analyze the blueprints of battleships' main cannons from the trash. They are all idiots. Su Lu smiled bitterly. He knew that his analysis was too ridiculous. It was all to make himself understand and to make himself feel better. How could a girl like Xiaomeng, who would eat the wrong biscuit, be a spy? But at this time, he did not know that his analysis was infinitely close to the truth. Not only are there no deep-fried pancakes today, there's no supper at all. Tai Ziyuan said into the intercom with a sullen expression. He had just decided not to let butler Jean prepare supper, but he did not expect that the guy on the other side would dare to forget to bring supper. Su Li's feeble reply came from the intercom, I'm in a bad mood today, so I forgot about it. You won't die even if you miss out on a meal. Hearing the rude words, Child C subconsciously prepared to get angry. But he suddenly understood that the guy on the other side, who was always cheerful, actually said that he was in a bad mood. He was instantly overwhelmed by a strong sense of curiosity. He frowned and asked, what happened? Su Li's monotonous voice sounded particularly dejected, I think I just fell in love, but then I mysteriously fell out of love. For some reason, Tai Ziyuan, who looked at those files every day, was suddenly interested in the gossip of the guy in the room. He asked, tell me about it. Su Lu, who was sitting in the mecha's operating cabin with his legs crossed and staring blankly at the high ceiling, suddenly had a thought when he heard the voice coming from the intercom. He thought that perhaps this mysterious fellow could really help him see some problems. That rogue official Shi Qinghai was full of hormones, he was really not a good candidate for studying relationship problems. Moreover, this mysterious fellow did not know who he was, so there were many things that were inconvenient for him to say. Lihua University would not be able to spread rumors about Zhang Xiaomeng anyway. After making up his mind, Su Lu very seriously recounted everything that had happened between him and Zhang Xiaomeng. He did not even avoid the events of that night. Of course, he did not mention the details, and he also left out some parts that might expose his and Zhang Xiaomeng's identities. The intercom was silent for a while, and then the other side suddenly asked, how long did you last? A drop of cold sweat trickled down Su Li's temple. He naturally knew that the other side was definitely not asking about how long he had lasted in the lowest level 6 test. After struggling for a long time, he lowered his voice and gave an approximate time in shame. The other side of the intercom was silent for an even longer time, and then came a burst of exaggerated laughter and a sentence that easily pierced Su Li's strong heart. Actually didn't last as long as you did for level 6, no wonder that woman doesn't want you. Su Lu said resentfully, isn't it like this the first time? Suddenly, he stared at the intercom and said mockingly, you don't even know this? You're probably still a virgin. Tai Ziyuan, who had been laughing loudly, stopped abruptly. He stared at the intercom, and after a long while, he pretended to be calm and changed the topic. A woman's heart is like a needle that has sunk to the bottom of the sea. You'll never find it. He didn't want to pay any more attention to Su Li's childish and boring emotional twists and turns, so he said coldly, "Begin." Last night, the outwardly gentle but innately proud young master of the Tai family had been defeated by Su Lu for the first time. Tai Ziyuan had thought that this was a coincidence, or perhaps it was because Su Lu had not brought porridge to eat last night, causing him to perform less well. And today, he had adjusted all his emotions, preparing to give Su Lu a painful and unforgettable mecha education. However, 5 minutes later, Tai Ziyuan's forcefully suppressed voice rang out once more from the intercom. "You just had sex yesterday, so let's say you took an aphrodisiac. Then what medicine did you take today?" Sweating profusely, Su Lu stared at the numbers on the screen with lingering fear. Immersed in the violent thrill of beating up the opponent's mecha, he said, "I just broke up today. Of course what I took was gunpowder." The taste of breaking up was not a good feeling, especially when you couldn't find the reason and couldn't make heads or tails of it. Regardless of whether he was a rock or she was a shrew, every man and woman in puberty had the most delicate and sensitive nerves in their life. Sighs and groans were all caused by the sadness and joy of separation and reunion. Even the slightest change in emotion would be magnified countless times by the young people in the midst of it. 10 years later, they might be able to laugh off their past stubbornness, but 10 years ago, no one would be able to escape this hurdle. In the classroom filled with holographic diagrams, Su Lu narrowed his eyes at the girl sitting in the front row with Hai Qingzhou. He thought to himself, what is love? Love is not a thing. Chapter 79. A warship is made up of 3 major systems: the structural system, the control system, and the propulsion system. Some of you might be thinking about the weapon system, the observation system. I think that students who look at the structure of a warship this way are basically all boys. Professor Zhou, who was sitting on the podium, was so loud that the tiny speaker clipped to his shirt pocket made a noise of protest. He stared at the male students in the classroom and said disdainfully, "Only little boys who like to read magazines would look at problems and recognize problems so simply. Don't forget, these 3 major systems are the foundation of everything." Let's take the Feather Series warship as an example. What are the 3 main laser cannons on it made of? A super alloy base and a crystal converter. Transmission control calibration. Energy activation. Professor Zhou raised his thumb and a beam of light appeared on the large screen. He enlarged the blueprint of the Feather 1 warship's main cannon base and pointed to 3 different parts. And these 3 most important components are the structural system, the control system, and the propulsion system. The energy output from the weapons is ultimately still part of the propulsion system. Of course, if you're talking about artillery shells used by the army, then pretend I didn't say anything. The 3 major systems don't just exist in the macroscopic scope, they are also the detailed components of every part of the warship. Only when these 3 major systems can perfectly coordinate and cooperate can, of course, the Feather Series warships have been retired a long time ago. Now that the Federation's crystal resources have dried up, I reckon that you won't have many chances to sit on a warship. Oh, the most important point is that our Yue University is not like the 3 major military academies or the Westwoods Military Academy. We don't have a warship command department, so it's useless to talk about this to you. The male students in the classroom laughed and booed, but Professor Zhou didn't care at all and continued to speak excitedly. Then why do I have to spend time talking about this? That's because no matter if it's the mecha you may come into contact with in the future, or those self-propelled armored vehicles, or self-propelled cannons, in the end, they are all small warships or miniature warships. What determines their performance and combat power are the 3 major systems of structure, control, and propulsion. Motherfucker, I suddenly remember that all of you are going to develop civilian warships in the future. I guess this class was wasted. The classroom was filled with laughter again, only Su Lu didn't laugh. He also didn't stare blankly at Zhang Xiaoming's back. His current mood was indeed somewhat complicated and low, but he would not allow his entire life to be trapped in this inexplicable melancholy. He listened very carefully to Professor Zhou's lecture, and faintly felt that he had gained something. A mecha is a small warship. Su Lu repeated Professor Zhou's words in his mind. He recalled the first time he repaired the ancient clock. the large number of M-type mecha blueprints he had read in Area H, and then connected it to his own work in Area H1 these past few nights. He had a deeper understanding of Professor Zhou's theory and connected it to an even stranger direction. This was because Uncle had once told him that the human body was the #1 machine. If a mecha was a small battleship, then wouldn't the human body be a small mecha? The human body was also composed of a control system, a structural system, and a power system. The structure naturally referred to the bones, muscles, organs, hair, blood, and skin. The control system naturally referred to the human brain and the transmission of nerves. Only through the transmission of nerve bundles could the consciousness of the brain control the contraction of the muscles, the movement of the joints, the breathing of the lungs, and the operation of these structural systems. Then what was the propulsion system? Naturally, the food consumed by the human body was converted into energy by the organs through digestion and absorption. The energy was stored in the human body as fat, blood sugar, and oxygen into the bloodstream. Then, the body would burn them to provide the human body with an endless supply of energy. Sulu thought about it silently. His body seemed to be different from the average person in terms of the last two systems. For example, when he operated the mecha, the consciousness of his brain seemed to be transmitted to his limbs through a completely new channel, and the mysterious trembling power in his body was obviously not something that could be activated through normal means. Every time he tried it, he would become so hungry. It should have something to do with the special characteristics of this energy, right? Sulu was satisfied with this speculation. He raised his head to look at the girl's back and began to feel dissatisfied again. The three major systems of his body were developing in the direction of becoming stronger, but unfortunately, the mysterious things like the heart and emotions could not become more numb. That little gatekeeper has been waiting outside the plum garden for 5 hours already. You really don't want to go down and take a look? Outside the door came the sounds of jeering and teasing from the girls. Perhaps some of them were really Zhang Xiaomeng's friends, but most of them were just here to watch the show. Zhang Xiaomeng had always been quiet and reserved in front of everyone, distant and cold. In addition to her past, she was actually not very popular among the girls of Yue University. Zhang Xiaomeng ignored the noise outside. Without her permission, the electronic door would not allow anyone to barge in. She also did not care much about other people's opinions or teasing. Other than in front of that young boy, she felt that she rarely lost her cool. Walking to the window, in the distance was the reflection of the Rose River under the night sky. Nearby was the lawn below the plum garden. On the edge of the lawn was a boy standing there like a rock. He had been standing there since class ended until night. Not only his body, even his expression did not seem to have changed. Zhang Xiaomeng stared at the boy in a daze. She picked up a cute little dog biscuit from the table and put it in her mouth. As she chewed, her eyes became moist. She was extremely distressed. The reason she was distressed was because she felt that she was very stupid. Since she knew that this would happen, she should not have acted that way that day. She should not have provoked him. Now that he was like this, and she was also this upset, she still had to pretend to be disgusting. It had to be admitted that Zhang Xiaomeng was a very kind person. Otherwise, she would not have given up on her beautiful family background and thrown herself into the business of seeking benefits for the lower class of the Federation. However, even though she had received training in S2, and the black-rimmed glasses made her look mature, she was still incomparably naive and childish when it came to matters between men and women. She was a complete mess. At this moment, the phone rang. Zhang Xiaomeng put it to her ear and heard Su Li's voice. Su Lu was a love-struck fool, and he was not the kind of man who would cry and shout about hanging himself. He was just very stubborn as a rock. He had to figure out the reason for Zhang Xiaomeng's sudden change in attitude, so he waited in the plum garden for half a night before finally getting through. He stopped Zhang Xiaomeng from questioning him about how he got the phone number and said calmly, "Don't be so cold. You're not Jian Shuier, and your acting isn't that good. Give up. I don't know what you're hiding, but I just want to tell you that this trick won't work on me. I'm guessing that you're looking at me from the window in the dark right now, and you're sincerely moved. Maybe you're even crying. After standing for a long time, Sula finally used the ruthlessness of the Clocktower Street orphan gang. He raised his head to look at the 7th floor, and said each word to the point, "Don't you think this is very childish?" Zhang Xiaoming was originally looking at Sula downstairs with tears in her eyes, but the 2 sentences that came out of the phone made her feel very conflicted. She hung up the phone and crawled into bed. The phone call ended, but Sula didn't leave the plum garden. He felt that his heart was empty, and if he didn't get the girl's warmth or words to fill it, it seemed like it would be empty forever. This was his first love, or at least, it was her first night. He thought that both of them should cherish it. So he acted like he cherished it and worked hard, and so he stood in the plum garden and waited. It was late autumn, and Sulu was an impulsive person. He was already prepared. He put on his thermal underwear and put on the green military windbreaker he got at the airport. It was the same one he wore when he first met Zhang Xiaoming. First, it was warm, and second, it made her think of him. This was the most comprehensive arrangement that Sulu, who was new to love, could think of. However, he miscalculated how much the heavens hated this kind of thing. A cold autumn rain came out of nowhere and drenched him. He wiped the rain off his face and looked at the sky with some annoyance. The plum garden was silent. Even the girls who came to watch the show had fallen asleep. Only the rain accompanied his figure, making him look very lonely. Later in the night, a girl who woke up in the middle of the night found the man in the rain and let out a low cry. In the deepest part of the night, the autumn rain suddenly turned into the first snow in the north of the planet. The floating snowflakes fell just like that, landing on Su Li's body and gradually cooling his body and his heart. In the early morning, Su Li brushed the snow off his body and left the plum garden silently. He felt that it was too cold. He could ask more about it during the ball. Zhang Xiaoming's face appeared in the window on the 7th floor of the plum garden. She looked at Su Li's footprints in the thin snow with some loneliness. She thought to herself that he had probably lost all hope in her. Su Li didn't go back to take a hot shower and go to sleep. Firstly, there wasn't much time left. Secondly, his incomparably strong body over the years had never seemed to have any problems with colds. Thirdly, there was a fire in his heart. There was no bright fire, which made him very depressed. He needed to find a way to vent. He silently walked into the still empty H1 area. He thought that the mysterious kid should have already gone to sleep by now. He could only roar at the light and color blocks in the 6th level. To his surprise, the small table in the lounge was already empty. However, the green indicator light for the door was still on. Could that guy still be inside? According to the usual practice, it was already 4 in the morning. Both he and that person should have gotten rid of the trouble of insomnia. Su Lu, who was drenched all over, felt a trace of worry. He suddenly forgot that he was actually in the darkest moment of his youth and walked toward that room. Chapter 80. He gently knocked on the door, but there was no response. Su Lu glanced at the green indicator beside the door in confusion. After confirming that the kid was still in the room, he knocked even harder, but there was still no response. Su Lu couldn't help but feel nervous. Could it be that something happened to that kid and he fainted? He suddenly remembered that the soundproofing materials in the H1 area were extremely high quality. Could it be that even the sound of knocking on the door couldn't be heard? He frowned and went straight back to his room. He took out the backpack that he had hidden in the deepest part of the storage box and walked back to the door of the other room. The contents of the backpack were randomly dumped on the ground. The metal tools and components collided with the elastic ground and made a strange sound. Su Li didn't stop at all. He began to pick up the tools and began to dismantle the lock. Every time he practiced in the room, he would habitually lock the door from the inside. He knew that the lock of this door was an antique structure. It wasn't the sensor door that was commonly seen in the Federation. If the person inside didn't open it, it would be difficult for the person outside to open it. Fortunately, Su Lu had been hanging around with Li Wei and the others since he was young. Although he didn't do too many illegal things, he still did a lot of searching for empty rooms in the Clock Tower Street. He had his own way of unlocking things. After learning from Uncle Feng Yu for a full 4 years, anything related to metal structures didn't seem to be difficult for him. In this aspect, he was born with a certain kind of sharp judgment and solving ability. The sound of springs and motors continuously rang and stopped. The self-powered tools continued to dismantle the lock, making bursts of noise. These sounds echoed in the quiet H1 area and were particularly harsh to the ears. Su Li's forehead was already breaking out in cold sweat. The tools in his hands were constantly changing, destroying those complicated structures. The worry in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Because even such a big commotion didn't cause the kid in the room to react at all, it seemed that something had really happened to him. With a hiss, the chip's Y-group line was connected. The last 3 metal parts of the lock sprang open. The door of the room retracted into the alloy wall, revealing a spacious space that was extremely similar to the room Su Lu stayed in every night. On the far wall was a platform. On the platform hung a black M-series prototype mecha. More than 10 data and current transmission belts of various colors connected it to the exit in the wall. Su Lu did not linger on this very familiar scene for long. He casually tossed his tools to the ground and rushed in the direction of the mecha. This was because he immediately saw a person with a full head of black hair leaning against the mecha's cockpit. From that posture, it was clear that his body was completely devoid of energy. He should have already fallen unconscious. The seemingly long distance was covered in a flash by Su Li's running. Just like when he had scaled the Federation's electronic wall back then, he nimbly climbed up the gap between the metal parts of the mecha's mechanical legs like an ape, not taking the proper route at all. Using his fastest speed to climb into the cockpit, Su Lu carefully helped the skinny youth to sit upright. He brought his face close to the youth's nose and mouth, pressing his fingers lightly against the youth's carotid artery. Only after confirming that the person's heartbeat and breathing were still normal did he relax slightly. Panting heavily, he thought to himself that the youth was probably just unconscious and should be easy to deal with. He just didn't understand why this guy had suddenly fainted. Using his palm to lightly pat the youth's face, Su Lu shouted anxiously, "Wake up, wake up!" The skinny youth's face was very pale. Being lightly patted twice by Su Lu actually caused an unhealthy flush to appear on his cheeks. Su Lu frowned, thinking that it was probably too late to call the school's hospital. Besides, those doctors probably did not have the authority to enter Area H and Area H1. He looked around, and his gaze fell on the fastening strap of the mecha's cockpit. Without even thinking, his right hand tugged at the middle of the strap. With a muffled grunt, he followed his will and felt a sudden heat at the back of his waist. That strange force traveled along with the slight tremors under his skin to his palm, and he pulled hard. With a crisp snap, the super-elastic fiber fastening strap that could hold the pilot's body in place under the high intensity of the mecha's movements snapped into 2 under Su Li's normal hand. Using the fastening strap to tie the skinny youth to his back, Su Lu cautiously but quickly climbed down from the tall mecha and landed on the ground. The moment his feet touched the ground, he rushed out of the door. He did not know what kind of illness this fellow had to have caused him to faint here for no reason. He did not dare to be careless. He needed to send the other to the hospital as quickly as possible. Carrying the skinny youth on his back, Su Lu passed through the room door and ran past the waiting room. One of the 2 alloy doors leading from Area H1 to Area H opened. Extremely worried and anxious, he suddenly heard a weak voice ring out from behind him. It was somewhat unfamiliar, yet somewhat familiar. "Where are you taking me?" "To the hospital." Su Lu did not turn around, replying instinctively. Only then did he realize that the person on his back had already woken up. Pleasantly surprised, he stopped in his tracks. "Put me down." The voice of the youth on his back was still weak, but it still sounded like an order, not allowing for rejection. Su Lu was taken aback for a moment. He unfastened the straps on his body and put the person down. Seeing that the other's face was still pale and somewhat abnormal, he quickly carried him into the waiting room and placed him on the sofa. Only then did Su Lu have the time to take a closer look at this face. He found that this was a rather delicate-looking young male student. His eyes were still tightly shut, and his thin lips were tightly pressed together as if in pain. Below his eye sockets were two patches of unhealthy light green. This was the first time Su Lu and Tai Ziyuan had met. At that time, Tai Ziyuan's eyes were tightly shut, in pain. Thus, from then on, in Su Li's impression of Tai Ziyuan, he was a sickly youth who was even younger than himself, looking very pitiful. This impression had been maintained for many years. No matter what kind of identity Tai Ziyuan later became, Su Lu had always stubbornly thought of him this way. "Let's go to the hospital first," suggested Su Lu with concern as he looked at the youth with his eyes tightly shut. Tai Ziyuan slowly opened his eyes. Su Li's words came to an abrupt halt. He had never thought that a youth's eyes could be so calm that they were like those of an old man who had already experienced countless years of vicissitudes. Although they still retained the youthful clarity, when Su Lu looked into his eyes, he always subconsciously thought that the other's eyes might never tremble in the slightest. This was the gaze that came naturally from one's status, experience, and mentality when looking down on the Federation. This was the calmness that came from growing up in the Federation's largest and most ancient clan. This was a pair of eyes that only a truly important figure could have. However, Su Lu didn't understand this at all. He only felt that the other's eyes were calm and gentle, yet without a trace of warmth. They exuded an absolutely perfect sense of reserve and pride amidst kindness. Su Lu scratched his head. He didn't want to think about why this kid's eyes were so gentle yet also made people feel fear. He said, "What happened?" Tai Ziyuan didn't expect that the first person he saw when he woke up would actually be that kid. He remained silent and didn't answer. His body had always been weak. His blood sugar was too low, and that problem had never shown any signs of improvement. Especially in recent years, he had been suffering from insomnia, which made him feel more and more tired by the day. Every night, he had to eat the supper that Butler Jean meticulously prepared to replenish his energy. He had instructed Butler Jean not to prepare supper because he was already used to the kid in that room bringing him food every day. However, he hadn't expected that for the next 4 days, other than the bag of deep-fried dough cakes that Su Lu brought him on the second day, he hadn't eaten anything else. Tai Ziyuan thought to himself with a headache. He seemed to have become a well-fed stray cat, used to certain things. Tai Ziyuan didn't want to interact too much with this young man in front of him, so much so that he didn't even want to see his face. However, now that they had finally met, he thought to himself angrily, if he hadn't lost to this novice in mecha operation and lost track of time, he wouldn't have fainted due to low blood sugar. It was precisely because of these thoughts that a crack appeared in the poise that he usually maintained perfectly in front of his subordinates and retainers. He stared at the young student who was looking at him with concern, and said word by word, "I didn't faint, I just fell asleep." Su Lu obviously didn't believe this explanation. He laughed out loud and said, "You didn't wake up even after trying to pry open the door for so long? Unless you're a pig." Tai Ziyuan's expression darkened slightly. For someone of his status to be called a pig was truly unbearable. After a moment of silence, he said, "My blood sugar is a little low." Then he frowned and said, "You haven't prepared supper for several days in a row. That's the reason." Su Lu had no responsibility or obligation to prepare supper for the other. If it had been anyone else, they would definitely have retorted sarcastically, but Su Lu felt that this really seemed to be his own fault. He had always been this kind of person, so he apologized somewhat guiltily. Although they had in fact already communicated with each other through pen and paper for a long time, and had even spoken through the intercom and fought in the virtual world before, this was actually only the first time Su Lu and Tai Ziyuan had met. They were two strangers with extremely different statuses, so at the beginning, the atmosphere between them had been somewhat awkward and strange. Until Tai Ziyuan mentioned the two words supper, the atmosphere instantly became familiar and comfortable. It was as if the H1 building had suddenly become a blank piece of paper, and these two young people had become two sentences on the blank piece of paper. Su Lu stood up and found a bottle of water and a pack of compressed high-calorie biscuits in the large pile of scattered things by the door. After a piece of biscuit and a sip of water, Tai Ziyuan's spirit was clearly much better. He smiled at Su Lu, then glanced at the high-calorie biscuits in his hand and said mockingly, You seem to be able to find food by your side no matter when or where. You really are like a mouse. Su Lo moved a chair to sit beside the sofa. Seeing that this kid was much more spirited, his mood also relaxed a lot. He sighed and replied, "Can't help it. I'm always hungry easily. If I don't carry some snacks by my side, there's no way I can survive." "Right, we've known each other for so long, but I still don't know your name." He very sincerely extended his hand and said, "My name is Su Lo." Of course Tai Ziyuan knew that he was called Su Lo. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly extended his hand and said, "Tai Ziyuan." Chapter 81. In the Federation, Yu was a very rare surname, but Su Lo felt like he had seen it somewhere before. He thought for a while, but couldn't remember where, so he threw it to the back of his mind. He looked at Tai Ziyuan's slightly pale face and said seriously, "Since you're not feeling well, why are you still staying up late every night? If you're suffering from insomnia, then you shouldn't drink coffee." At this point, Tai Ziyuan's body had basically returned to normal. He didn't want to interact with Su Lo, but just as he was about to leave, he heard such a sincere sentence, and he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. In Tai Ziyuan's opinion, scribbling on a piece of white paper with Su Lo every night and eating deep-fried soy milk and porridge was just an insignificant interlude in his life. He hadn't had his coming-of-age ceremony yet, so he allowed himself to be childish once in a while. But after all, these were still childish things. He had ordered Butler Jean, the only person who had the authority to enter District H1, to forbid him from entering while he was still in District H1. This was because he didn't want his loyal subordinates, who treated him like an emperor, to discover that he actually had a mischievous side to him. It was precisely because of this reason that even though he returned to the small villa much later than usual, Butler Jean could only obediently wait in the passageway and didn't dare to enter. After all, Butler Jean would never have guessed that young master would be in a coma. Even he didn't know that Tai Ziyuan's body had a very troublesome illness other than hypoglycemia. Tai Ziyuan knew that he owed Su Lo a favor, and he could easily see from the other's eyes that he was really sincere. Thus, he smiled and sat on the sofa, no longer in a hurry to leave. Su Lo was also extremely sensitive to the fact that the calm gaze of this thin and weak youth seemed to have become gentler. However, this gentleness was still condescending and unruffled. It gave off a feeling of being thousands of miles away, and Su Lo wasn't used to it. He frowned and said, "Since you don't want to go to the hospital, do you want me to send you home?" At this time, Su Lo had already guessed that the other party must be a young master from a wealthy family. After all, not everyone could eat Caspian caviar as a normal snack. And after so many days, Su Lo found that except for himself and this guy called Tai Ziyuan, there was no third person who could enter the H1 area. Su Lo could analyze that his ability to enter H1 was definitely due to the disguise chip that the boss left for him. What about the other party? Tai Ziyuan did not immediately answer his question. Instead, he looked at him with interest, as if he wanted to see what kind of person Su Lo was. The worthless supper was not a problem, but after only eating a few of his biscuits and drinking a cup of coffee, he was determined to make up for it. Moreover, he did not tire of it and persisted for so many days. This was not easy, not to mention that the other party's earlier anxiousness about his coma was not fake. He grew up under the education of political history, conspiracies, and so on. It was really hard to imagine that there really was a person in the world like Su Lo who was completely willing to help others from the bottom of his heart without asking for anything in return. Even if there was such a person, it shouldn't be a young man under the age of 20. This kind of calm and unhurried gaze made Su Lo feel a great deal of pressure. He secretly felt strange in his heart. This guy looked so pitiful and harmless with his eyes closed, but when he opened them, he was so overbearing. It was really strange. Since there was no problem with the other party's body, he was not as nervous as before. The exhaustion of a sleepless night and the hard work of guarding under the plum garden all poured into his body. He could not help but gently exhale, slumped into the chair, and looked at the other party with slightly narrowed eyes. If you don't want to talk, then don't talk. Rest for a while before you go out. After a long time, Tai Ziyuan seemed to react. He said very slowly and gently, "Thank you, I can leave by myself." Su Li's pair of knife-like eyebrows trembled slightly. Only then did he realize that the other party's voice was somewhat different from the voice on the intercom. It was not a difference in the quality of the voice, but the change in the speed of the voice, which actually made this thin and weak youth feel a little more dignified. Su Lu suspected that he was hearing things. He opened his eyes in confusion and looked at him. "You're that virgin, right?" Tai Ziyuan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not show the anger in his heart. He said indifferently, "Premature ejaculation guy, do you have any questions?" Su Lu was embarrassed, but he immediately patted him on the shoulder with a smile and said, "Not bad, it's just that you're such a vicious guy. I'm not used to seeing you speak like a president giving a war speech." Tai Ziyuan's eyes swept over his shoulder without leaving a trace. He was not used to people showing their closeness to him, especially patting his body so casually. For many years, no one had dared to do this. The only one who had dared to do this was Zhou Yu, but ever since she found out about his identity, she had also become a quail in front of him. Su Lu did not notice the emotions on Tai Ziyuan's face, or maybe he was just too lazy to care. He sighed and said, "I come to H1 every day for my own reasons. What about you? Is it really just insomnia and boredom?" "Insomnia is because of stress." Tai Ziyuan looked at Su Lu calmly. He suddenly remembered that this guy in front of him had even told him about his own bed matters. An extremely absurd feeling suddenly welled up in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he smiled and said, "You should have already guessed that my family is very rich, but my father was unlucky and died too early. I was taught from a young age to inherit the family business and to bear those heavy responsibilities. This kind of pressure really makes me feel uneasy. Although I believe in my own ability, I always feel that it's not too fun to think about the things that happened when I was 80 when I just turned 18. After saying this, Tai Ziyuan frowned slightly. He did not understand why he seemed to trust the other person so much subconsciously. Looking at Su Li's honest face, he said the words that he had always hidden in the depths of his heart. Su Lu did not express any shock. He just shrugged. He had already guessed that the other person's family background was not ordinary, so of course he was not surprised. However, at this moment, he could not imagine that the family business that Tai Ziyuan said he was going to inherit was a family business that was terrifyingly huge. He only said comfortingly, "Who doesn't have stress in life? I just felt that you were younger than me, but now I know that you're only 18. Why do you have to live so hard? Things like stress, it's better to keep it in your heart. Just live your life as usual." Su Lu was lamenting about his own experiences. He was just an ordinary Federation youth who wanted to live a normal life. However, because he met this uncle, the trajectory of his life had been forcefully twisted into a shape that he had never dared to imagine. The Federation's only counterfeit microchip was installed behind his neck. If this secret was discovered by someone, he would definitely know how to write the 4 words "living a life worse than death." The pressure he bore was actually also very great, but he faced it all tenaciously and optimistically, and also comforted the other in this way. Tai Ziyuan was slightly taken aback. He naturally could not relax just because of a few words from the other, and his strong self-discipline made it so that he did not want to relax at all. He looked at Su Lu and said with a smile, "There are some pressures that you have to bear. You can't run away from them. You even have to forcibly magnify them. Only then can you urge us to move forward." Su Lu shook his head. He felt that this kid with the surname C was the same as Zhang Xiaoming. They both had the potential to be masochistic. He looked at him and said very seriously, "I keep feeling that these words aren't right. No matter how great your future is, it's not worth sacrificing your health. Don't tell me that you still want to be the president." After being slightly taken aback, Tai Ziyuan stared at him with an extremely playful gaze. Then, he laughed loudly. In the end, his laughter turned into coughing, and he kept coughing. Crazy. Su Lu thought in his heart. A trace of a bitter smile appeared on his face. He told him his phone number and said, "We've known each other for so many days. You've eaten so much of my food, so we can be considered friends. If there's anything in the future, just give me a call. Tai Ziyuan's laughter stopped. He quietly watched Su Li's back as he walked to the door to clean up the mess on the floor. He thought to himself that he would probably never make this call. I've already met with Senator Pabre. I didn't let you down. He and his shabby staff have indeed come up with a very attractive and operable political program and reform plan. A woman appeared on the light screen of the small villa. This woman was about 40 years old. From the back, she still looked very attractive. At this time, she was wearing a set of home clothes and drying the sheets on the balcony. The woman was doing very ordinary household chores, but she talked about her meeting with the rising political star of the Federation, Senator Pabre from the Donglin district. Tai Ziyuan calmly looked at his mother on the light screen. He didn't open his mouth to ask, because he knew that since his mother had used a secret line to contact him, it definitely wasn't to tell him about the results of the negotiation. She must have something more important to say. Pabre is a middle-aged man who is too idealistic. That woman shook the sheets and continued, but it's already a good choice. It's just that he's always a bit distrustful and afraid of our family. I made a big concession in order to gain his trust. I've decided to push the management committee to amend the constitution to allow the president to be re-elected twice during special times. The woman of the Tai family turned around and softly said to the light screen, if Pabre doesn't make any mistakes, I hope that he can stay in that palace for 15 years. Tai Ziyuan's expression finally changed. He frowned and said, this is a big move. Even if our family can win the support of those families, it's not likely that we can control the members of the management committee. Not to mention that the people are naturally resistant to this kind of thing. Within 15 years, the empire will definitely start another war. The woman of the Tai family calmly said, a country that can only resolve the bloody conflicts within the social class by conquering other countries cannot do without war. As long as the war starts, our Pabre, of course, has enough reason to become the first president to be re-elected 3 times. Tai Ziyuan didn't say anything. He respected Senator Pabre very much, so he was very disgusted by his mother saying, our Pabre, 15 years later, you'll be 33 years old. The woman on the light screen softly said, it's time for the Federation to have the youngest president in its history. Tai Ziyuan closed his eyes and said sarcastically, Pabre can be re-elected 3 times. I'm still young, so of course I can be re-elected even more times. Chapter 82. It will be the Double Moon Festival Ball in 2 days. The woman on the screen was obviously not angered by her only son's mocking tone. She smiled and said, I met your father at that ball. I hope you are as lucky as your father. Child, enjoy it. See you during the winter break. Tai Ziyuan smiled and replied, I don't think my father is lucky. This was a joke that could be made as a son. He added in his heart that his life was not that enjoyable. Although the girl from the Zhou family will definitely not be chosen as your wife, I always thought that with her beauty and your relationship with her in the past, you wouldn't mind developing a relationship with her. The woman on the screen suddenly had a mischievous smile. Moreover, I always thought that her waist and butt shape were very suitable for bearing children. The screen returned to darkness and then retracted into the ceiling. Tai Ziyuan's expression calmed down. He dipped a piece of paper in water and wiped away the foundation under his eyes. Although he respected his mother more than he loved her, which was completely different from his relationship with his father in the past, he knew in his heart that his mother was doing everything for him. He was a filial son, and he did not want Lady Tai to worry about his body. There were still 2 days before the Double Moon Festival Ball. Tai Ziyuan fell into silence under the autumn afternoon sun. He did not care about the ball. He knew very well why Yuzi had come to Yue University. He was a little tired of appearing in front of those who knew him with a certain appearance, because he did not like to be surrounded by those people in the most central position. According to the tradition of the Double Moon Festival Ball, he should be on the 2nd floor, overlooking the dancing men and women downstairs. He would choose the one he liked the most among the opposite sex in the ball, and then gently invite her, hoping that she would become his close friend for a certain period of time. At the same time, he would end his 18 years of virginity. Yes, according to the tradition of the Tai family, this double moon festival ball was coincidentally Tai Ziyuan's coming-of-age ceremony. However, only a few people in the Federation knew about it. Perhaps some powerful people had vaguely caught wind of something, but they would never be able to find out the actual details. The Tai family's coming-of-age ceremony was held 2 years earlier than the other big families' coming-of-age ceremonies. They chose to hold it on any day of the year the youngster turned 18, during any ball. What was even more special was that the Tai family's coming-of-age ceremony was a trial of love and romance. No girl could refuse the invitation of a descendant of the Tai family. Even if some people didn't know who he was and didn't know that he represented the history of the most ancient and most respected family in the Federation, they would still sink into the dreamy environment created by unlimited wealth and power in the future. Love was never the main character in this story, or it could be said that love itself could be planned, just like the president who represented the spirit of the Federation and the power of the people. What was strange was that in the past, the descendants of the Tai family didn't know that their coming-of-age ceremony was a test. Many people jumped in like moths, bravely loving like every other child in a normal family. Some people chose to dance with their coming-of-age ceremony and became the woman who would accompany them for the rest of their lives. For example, Tai Ziyuan's father, this could be said to be a happy ending. However, more people found out during this process that those cold beauties who were untouchable in the eyes of young men would become sad and obedient lambs in front of the terrifying power of the Tai family. During this process, they realized that the so-called love wasn't as pure and holy as they thought it was. The ancestor of the Tai family set this strange rule to let his male descendants know that love was something that could be bought with money and power. This way, they wouldn't make irreversible mistakes because of the matters between men and women in the future. Tai Ziyuan was lucky. Maybe it was because he was the only son in 7 generations, or maybe it was because his father and mother were a rare couple who loved each other from their coming-of-age ceremony until the end. When he was very young, Lady Tai had already told him the true meaning of the coming-of-age ceremony. She also told him calmly and seriously that he shouldn't expect to be as lucky as his father. As the descendant of the Tai family, he could and should have love, but it couldn't be during the coming-of-age ceremony. This was what Tai Ziyuan couldn't understand the most. The 7 great families, including the Tai family, had always attached great importance to the rules that had been passed down since ancient times. Even though Lady Tai wasn't a stubborn person, and had even told him the true meaning of the coming-of-age ceremony, she still asked him to use the Double Moon Festival as an opportunity to find a female partner for this year's school life. From Tai Ziyuan's point of view, this method was undoubtedly very similar to the saying, "Take off your pants and fart." Tai Ziyuan grew up in the society of the Federation. The books he read and the television he watched were all content from this era. Although he grew up in an extremely wealthy environment, and the education he received was completely different from his peers, he was mature and calm beyond his age, and he also had a heart that was brave enough to bear the responsibility of his family. However, in the end, he still couldn't adapt to many details. The glory of the ancient royal family was too far away from him. He didn't understand why his subordinates always treated him like a prince. From his point of view, in a democratic society, there shouldn't be such a way of thinking. Today, Lady Tai's words made Tai Ziyuan have a clearer understanding of his own identity and the glorious future he had planned for a long time ago. The pressure that had accompanied him since he was young seemed to have solidified and filled the entire room, making it difficult for him to breathe. He closed his eyes and remained silent for a long time. Then, he picked up his personal cell phone and dialed a number. This number was only mentioned once, and Tai Ziyuan easily remembered it. He originally thought that he would never dial this number in his life, but he didn't expect that after only half a day, he would change his mind. "Don't bring supper tonight, bring a set of clothes. Also, do you know if there are any quieter brothels in Linhai?" "No need. Thank you." After hanging up the phone, Tai Ziyuan closed his eyes and rested, waiting for the night and the next day to come. He was a self-disciplined and responsible descendant of an aristocratic family. Although he occasionally rejected the atmosphere around him and his mother's arrangements, he wouldn't choose to childishly escape or resist. But in his heart, he thought that at least things like the coming-of-age ceremony should be arranged by himself. It was like a dream, such a short reunion. Su Lo stared blankly at the empty table in front of him. There wasn't a single naked girl there. For days had passed, and he felt that he was gradually getting used to living without her. After escaping from the Donglin district, he had become accustomed to being alone and silent. But he still noticed that she wasn't at the table across from him, on the track, on the Rose River, and at night. Students passing by would occasionally notice him, who was in a daze at the table by the window. Those who knew about this would cast mocking and disdainful glances at him. In everyone's eyes, a swan might occasionally look for food with a toad in the pond, but it was impossible for her to really marry a toad. The midday autumn sun shone through the window and fell on Su Li's body. He, who was in a daze, felt a trace of warmth. Then his phone rang, but the thin screen that popped up didn't show the number or area. He doubtfully answered the call, and then heard the voice that he had been hearing recently. Then, he fell into an indescribable state of shock. Why did he want to find a brothel? Su Lo knew that there was something wrong with the kid surnamed Yu's brain, but he didn't want to stay in Yo University and stay under the mocking gazes of those students. After thinking for a while, he agreed and then seriously suggested, I don't know much about these things, but I have a friend who should know a lot. Do you want to call him? No need. Okay then, I'll wait for you in the lounge tonight. You're welcome. Don't tell me you're planning to run away from home. Su Lo looked at Tai Ziyuan and asked seriously. He couldn't get used to the fact that a child from a rich family would use the tone of a thesis defense to ask him to help him find a woman. He said, no matter how much pressure there is at home, your parents are after all looking out for you. Don't mess around. After saying this, Su Lo remembered that Su Li's father had passed away a long time ago, and a trace of apology appeared on his face. However, these few words came from the bottom of his heart. His family members had unfortunately died in that mining accident, and this made Su Lo yearn for that kind of warmth more than anyone else. Tai Ziyuan calmly replied, Don't you often mock me for being a virgin? I just want to find a woman to test out what's going on. What I find strange is that you actually agreed to my request without even blinking your eyes. I can't help but wonder if you do this kind of thing often. Su Lo smiled bitterly and didn't answer. Thinking back to when he was on Clocktower Street, he had to go to those sanatoriums every month to pay for his boss's prostitutes. He seemed to have gotten used to this kind of request, so he naturally agreed to it over the phone. Lai Ziyuan glanced at the green military windbreaker he was wearing and tried to put the rain hat on his head. It was only after he confirmed that the surveillance equipment outside of Area H1 couldn't capture his face that he nodded in satisfaction. Then, he frowned slightly and asked, Where did you get Silen's military uniform? I forgot. Su Lo was very used to lying in front of his friends, and he didn't want to talk about things related to Little Watermelon. He didn't want to have anything to do with the high and mighty Zhong family in this life. Looking at Tai Ziyuan, who was tightly wrapped in the windbreaker, he said doubtfully, Why do I feel like we're preparing to be thieves? Tai Ziyuan didn't answer him. Instead, he walked directly out of Area H. It was 4:00 in the morning, and there was no one in Area H. He and Su Lo talked casually and killed time. They waited until after 6:00 in the morning, when other students began to come in. They looked at each other and walked outside. Chapter 83. Those diligent students did not know that the two of them came from Area H1. They thought that the two of them had woken up earlier than them, and could not help but show expressions of admiration. Amidst such expressions, Su Lo and Tai Ziyuan, who was wearing a green military windbreaker, quietly left Area H of the library and embarked on the road to find a woman. Looks like he really is a thief. It had snowed a few days ago, and the weather was a little cold. Su Lo tied his scarf tighter around his neck. Looking at the silent Tai Ziyuan beside him, endless curiosity grew in his heart. He actually dared to come out in disguise? Was this guy's family that strict? Passing through Yo University in the morning, along the way, countless female students were either having their morning exercise or breakfast. Su Lo rubbed his tired face and said, "The ratio of men to women in Shanglin is the exact opposite of that in Donglin. There are more women than men. If you really want to get rid of your virginity as soon as possible, hurry up and fall in love." Tai Ziyuan's entire face was covered by a rain hat, and only the lower half of his face could be seen. He smiled and sniffed the campus air, looking at the students walking freely in the light autumn wind. He did not answer Su Li's words, but said, "Didn't you just break up with a woman? Why are you willing to accompany me to find a woman? This love is a little too cheap." Su Lo laughed bitterly and replied, "I'm just sympathizing with a poor person like you who is too strict with your family. I have no intention of accompanying you into the water." Tai Ziyuan did not pay attention to his explanation. He just calmly and attentively enjoyed the rare freedom and worldly atmosphere. He left home when he was young. Lady Tai had originally hoped that he could grow up healthily like a normal Federation youth, so she sent him to an ordinary primary school in the special capital district. However, not long after, his identity was leaked. For safety and to avoid the flattery and fawning that followed him everywhere, Lady Tai had to give up on this idea. Tai Ziyuan began to transfer schools continuously, including Capital University Preparatory School and Yue University. These were all places that the Tai family could completely control, and he also received the best protection in these schools. It had been many years since he had gone to school like an ordinary person. Tai Ziyuan missed the childhood days when he played with Zhou Yu. The two of them walked through a forest in silence, passing by Yue University's space-styled multipurpose building. At the same time, they noticed that the multipurpose building was unusually lively today. Countless heavy vehicles were passing through, and the school's staff were nervously setting up the venue. A huge banner was pulled up, and the words on it were covered by a cloth, so they couldn't see it. "Tomorrow's Double Moon Festival Ball looks really grand." Su Li's mood suddenly dropped. Zhang Xiaomeng would probably be attending the ball with the councilman's son. Naturally, he would not be going. It's not just a ball. The First Military Academy is going to visit our school tomorrow. I heard that there will be a mecha show in the comprehensive hall. Tai Ziyuan calmly looked in the direction of the general gymnasium and told Su Lo, after going around in a circle, Area H1 is actually behind the general gymnasium. He noticed Su Li's silence and said, "The ball is at night. Every student has to attend. Even I can't escape. I'm not going." After a short pause, Su Lo said calmly, "I'm just an auditing student. No one will say anything about me even if I don't go. Are you worried that you'll see an ex-girlfriend who has moved on?" Tai Ziyuan smiled warmly and said, "I advise you to go. Perhaps there will be some surprise waiting for you." Su Lo shook his head. These past few days had already convinced him that Zhang Xiaomeng had made up her mind. Although he still felt that there was something strange about this matter, he was still unwilling to give up. However, a woman's heart was an elusive thing to begin with, there could not be any real surprises. He looked at the staff and heavy trucks going in and out of the comprehensive gymnasium, and asked curiously, "Why is the First Military Academy coming to visit our school? Our school doesn't have a mecha piloting specialization." "That's a matter for the military, a mecha show? Why is that?" He was somewhat curious about the abilities of the students of the Federation's most advanced military academy in terms of mecha piloting. However, when he thought of his own extremely slow operation, he lost all interest. As for his competitive spirit, it was completely gone. Tai Ziyuan smiled bitterly, thinking to himself that the First Military Academy had specially come to Pear Blossom University to perform mecha piloting. Naturally, it was to demonstrate to Pear Blossom University, and at the same time, to prove to the Tai family that if they wanted to learn about mecha piloting, they should still return to the First Military Academy. Tai Ziyuan naturally would not explain things to Su Lo. He walked past the entrance of the comprehensive gymnasium and headed out of the school. Outside the school, the two of them had a casual breakfast. Tai Ziyuan was very satisfied with the taste of this small restaurant. He looked at Su Lo and said approvingly, "Looks like having you be the tour guide was not a bad choice. You poor child. Sulu said sympathetically, "Where do you want to go later? I'll treat you. Amusement park or cinema?" Tai Ziyuan was slightly taken aback. He said seriously, "I just want to find a woman." Sulu scratched his head and said helplessly, "You're really a more persistent person than me. But as far as I know, those places don't open in the morning." While waiting for a taxi by the roadside, Sulu called Shi Qinghai. He held the phone and asked, "Old Shi, do you know any places that open in the morning?" "Of course, I'm talking about that kind of place." "What kind?" It's a place where you can find a woman." Shi Qinghai was hugging a young woman on the bed. His sleepiness was instantly swept away, and he praised loudly into the phone, "You're enlightened. Looks like the blow of a boyfriend has really enlightened you. How many times have I told you to go with me, but you don't want to go? Don't worry, as long as you have the money, I can find a place that opens for you even if it's Memorial Day. Are you at the back door of Pear Blossom Garden at this time? Wait for me to come and fetch you." The half-naked young woman in his arms suddenly looked at him bitterly. She wondered why this beautiful man was so insensible. Shi Qinghai felt the gaze of the beautiful woman in his arms. He coughed twice and said awkwardly into the phone, "See you then." Sulu glanced at Tai Ziyuan beside him. He knew that the other party didn't want to see Shi Qinghai. He said awkwardly into the phone, "Just tell me the address. You don't have to accompany me." Shi Qinghai on the other end of the phone was stunned. He thought that Sulu was shy. After thinking for a while, he said with a smile, "That's fine too. Just write down the address. By the way, I'm going to buy clothes for the Double Moon Festival tomorrow night. I'll buy a set for you while I'm at it. I'll send it to you tomorrow morning." Sulu wanted to decline and say that he didn't want to go to the ball. Even if he wanted to go, he had already bought the clothes. However, he suddenly remembered that those clothes were bought together with Zhang Xiaoming. His heart suddenly became slightly sour. While he was silent, Shi Qinghai had already hung up the phone. "I didn't expect that I could call the teacher to find the brothel." Tai Ziyuan frowned slightly and shook his head. Brothels were brothels. It was said that they were called brothels in the empire. No matter which era, region, or country, this industry was always so prosperous. Together with politics, they were two industries that would never decline. In the Federation, the prostitution industry had never been legalized. From the era of imperial power to the era of constitutional law, until the recent Federation, human society had always been debating where this industry should go. The Federation Management Committee had been debating for 600 years to pass the relevant laws. It was expected that the debate would continue in the future. However, this industry already existed and would exist forever. Before the committee could pass the final bill, they could only pass a lot of additional regulations to regulate this industry. For example, the opening hours, the number of medical examinations for employees, the calculation method of tax, disease prevention and control education, and the distance between the business premises, schools, and government departments. In short, the countless additional regulations showed that the Federation government had already recognized the existence of this industry. However, there was no law that explicitly stated that the Federation allowed prostitution. Therefore, those places that provided services were not called brothels, nor were they called brothels. Because of the national sentiment, they couldn't hang the old-fashioned sign of a brothel. In the Donglin district, this kind of place was called a sanatorium. It was Uncle Feng Yu's favorite place to visit. In a rich area like Shanglin, it was called a clubhouse. The first snow had melted in Linhai, making it look especially clean and chilly. A taxi stopped on the side of a quiet street in Linhai. Compared to those private clubs that didn't operate to the public, the Stars Clubhouse was definitely not that great. However, in the field of public clubs, it was undoubtedly the most luxurious place in Linhai. Two young people who looked like students walked into the Stars Clubhouse at around 8 in the morning. The receptionist in charge of reception was shocked. She thought that young people nowadays were really amazing. She hadn't even brushed her teeth yet and there were already customers. She was a bit puzzled. Did these two young people come to the wrong place? Tai Ziyuan calmly and with great interest scanned the interior of the clubhouse. He was quite satisfied with the taste of this clubhouse, especially the rockery fountain in the middle of the hall. The design was quite elegant. There was no smell in the air, making it seem a bit fresh. No need for introductions. Let me see the package list. Su Le walked to the front desk, smiled gently at the pretty lady, and said in a practiced manner. The lady was slightly startled. Then, she immediately put on a professional smile on her face and said in a soft and seductive voice, "Okay." However, she felt a bit of disdain in her heart. He was already a regular customer at such a young age. How depraved was that? Su Le obviously didn't know how the lady was looking down on him. He looked at the package list in boredom. Under normal circumstances, he definitely wouldn't take it out. He wasn't surprised to find that the cost of living in the capital ring was much higher than in Donglin. He glanced at Tai Ziyuan who was sitting on the sofa and couldn't help but laugh. He thought to himself that this kid could keep his composure. This one then. Su Le pointed at a line on the list. Then, he lowered his voice and sincerely said, "My friend is still, that. Help me choose a gentle and experienced one. Also, prepare some food in the room." Su Le was very worried that the Tai family kid, who had been suffering from insomnia for many years, would be too happy to do this kind of thing for the first time. He would toss and turn and faint again, so he carefully added a request. Chapter 84. The receptionist of the Star Clubhouse immediately understood the meaning of Su Le's words and smiled slightly. She had been working in this kind of place for a long time and had seen all kinds of strange things. However, it was rare to see a classmate pick the most expensive clubhouse in Linhai. Thinking of this, the receptionist immediately sensed that the other party might have some financial strength, so she said, "Please don't worry, I'll arrange for an A card, but the price will be a bit more expensive." Su Le thought that Tai Ziyuan's family must be very rich, so he naturally wouldn't care about this, so he nodded. The receptionist began to arrange in a low voice into the communicator. Su Le's ears were a bit sharp, so he heard what seemed to be a burst of laughter coming from the other end of the communicator, followed by a burst of suppressed exclamation. "I always thought it was so early and you haven't started work yet." Su Le had lived among the orphans since childhood and was at the bottom of society. He didn't have any contempt for women who worked in the clubhouse. He said to the receptionist with a gentle smile, "I didn't expect there to be an A card." The receptionist saw Su Le's sincere smile and his well-practiced performance, so she felt more and more that this young man was not only depraved but also hypocritical. She covered her mouth and giggled, saying, "The A card usually goes home early, but you're lucky today. The most popular sister in the clubhouse happens to be here, and I heard it's a little boy who volunteered to fight." Su Le let out an sound and scratched his head, thinking to himself, "Can Sun's origin take it?" He suddenly thought of the vicious comments that Nightmare Source had made about him in H1. He chuckled, thinking that it wouldn't be bad to let Nightmare Source break his own record in a while. "What's your arrangement?" asked the receptionist. "I don't need it." Su Le, who had been pretending to be an old Taoist since he walked into the clubhouse, finally showed some embarrassment at this moment. He coughed and said, "Get me a cup of tea." "I'll wait for him." "Okay." The receptionist was a bit surprised that he would make such a request, so she respectfully led the two of them to the back garden of the clubhouse. They walked through the wooden road covered with expensive carpets and around two small courtyards dotted with bamboo ponds to reach the real place. A cup of tea had been poured countless times. Su Guang took out his phone and looked at the time. Half an hour had passed, but that kid still hadn't come out. He couldn't help but feel extremely frustrated. At this time, he was sitting in a lounge with only 3 sofas, waiting for Tai Ziyuan to be defeated. However, in such an environment, it was impossible to say that he was not nervous. Therefore, he drank his tea very quickly and had already gone to the bathroom once. Because it was still too early, there were not many guests in the large clubhouse. The 2 students were the only guests. As for the ladies who had been busy all night, they were resting in their own dormitories, so the Star Clubhouse was quiet. After some time, Sula finally adapted to this feeling. In the silence, he could no longer resist the tiredness accumulated over the past few nights. He leaned on the sofa and fell into a deep sleep. What woke him up from his sleep was countless sparrows. Those sparrows kept chirping in his ears. It was very annoying. He opened his eyes with great difficulty and waved his hand to drive those sparrows away. Unexpectedly, his hand touched a piece of smooth and greasy skin. Sulu was shocked. Only then did he realize that a dozen girls had entered the lounge at some point in time. These girls were surrounding him and chattering non-stop. Some of them were even bold enough to sit beside him. They were very close to him and were looking at his face. When he waved his hand subconsciously after waking up, he touched a girl's naked thigh. Sulu quickly sat up and looked at these girls in disbelief. He found that the girl whose thigh he touched didn't look angry at all. Instead, she squinted her eyes and leaned over, asking, "Are you that little awesome's classmate?" Sulu subconsciously thought that Tai Ziyuan's identity as a rich young master was known by these ladies, but then he realized that was not the case. At this time, he couldn't care so much. He said with a wry smile, "What's going on? What time is it?" A girl wearing slippers on the sofa at the door yawned and said, "It's 12 o'clock. The club basically had no business in the morning." Since Sula didn't want to wait in the hall, the lady at the front desk arranged for him to go to the lounge with a row of clocks. She thought that the sofa there would be more comfortable. She didn't expect that Sulu would sleep for 3 hours. He slept until it was time for those ladies to go to work. Those ladies had seen all kinds of people in their lives. When they saw a young man on the sofa, they were a little surprised. They surrounded him and pointed at him. The scene at this time couldn't be said to be erotic. The rules of the club were very strict. Those ladies had to go to work so early, but in fact, no customers would come so early. Therefore, they were still wearing comfortable pajamas with no makeup on their faces. Most of them were still wearing slippers on their feet. They looked as comfortable as they could be. However, the haggard smell between their eyebrows exposed their real jobs. Even so, these ladies could still be said to be delicate and beautiful. The pajamas couldn't hide their graceful figures. Sulu glanced at them and felt that his eyes were dazzled. He thought to himself that Shi Qinghai was really worthy of being called the divine hand of flowers. The star club he pointed to was really full of beauties. He just didn't know how beautiful that A-card with Tai Ziyuan would be. Thinking of Tai Ziyuan, Su Li's heart thumped. He thought to himself, that guy couldn't find me and left first, right? He said to the lady next to him apologetically, "Excuse me, when did my classmate leave? Call me Sister Lulu." The lady was sitting next to him. She was wearing a short skirt that just wrapped around her hips. One of her feet was on the sofa, and she was painting her toenails while hugging her thighs. Sulu glanced over and happened to see the snow-white thighs and the soft breasts that were pressed against the chest. At this time, the lounge was no longer as quiet as before. The delicate voices of those women rose and fell, and the air in the room was full of the unique scent of women. Mixed with the perfume, it was very charming. In addition, he found that the naked thighs of the lady next to him were the ones he had just touched. He couldn't help but feel that his fingers were a little slippery, and his mind was in a mess. He quickly pretended to look away naturally and asked sincerely in a low voice, "Sister Lulu, when did my classmate leave?" The girl called Lulu raised her head and said with a smile, "Don't worry, your classmate didn't leave you behind. He's still in the room." The girl didn't have any makeup on, but there was a natural charm between her eyebrows. She giggled and hugged Su Li's arm, saying, "That little badass is amazing." He added 2 more hours. "I say, are you just going to wait like this? Why don't you take care of me? Yeah, let's see if you're that amazing." When Sulu looked away, how could he escape the eyes of these girls who had seen countless people? They immediately knew that even if this guy wasn't a virgin, his skin was very thin. The girls surrounded him again, teasing and seducing him as a pastime before work started. Feeling the soft touch of the upper arm, Su Li's heart was very flustered. Seeing and touching were really different. The girls around him all surrounded him, and those white thighs and breasts flashed past his eyes from time to time. Su Li's mouth suddenly felt a little thirsty. But he still remembered the matter with Tai Ziyuan. He thought with some disbelief. He added 2 more hours, and this was more than 3 hours. From morning to noon. That guy just met someone, he wouldn't not know how to restrain himself and end up doing it, right? But Su Lu really didn't have time to care about Tai Ziyuan at this time. He had to find a way to fool the situation in front of him. He said to the girls around him with a sad face, "I think I'd better go out. You're going to start work soon. You have to dress up and change clothes. It's not convenient for me to be here." He stood up as he spoke, but unexpectedly he was pulled down by the girl named Lulu, who whispered in his ear, "What are you afraid of? Those perverts finish drinking at noon and wait until 2 o'clock. Even if they dare to come out in the afternoon, they have to wait until 3 o'clock. It's still a long time. Little brother, what are you going out for? We're going to change clothes. You can just watch from the side." Su Li's ear was blown by the hot breath, and his heart swayed again. His body was soft, and he couldn't walk anymore. He said with a bitter face, "Spare me." Suddenly, he had an idea. He looked at the girls around him who were trembling with laughter and suggested, "Anyway, you have nothing to do. How about playing poker?" As a result, a wonderful scene appeared in the ladies' lounge of the most exclusive club in Linhai. A young male student accompanied the ladies and began to seriously play poker. The girl named Lulu had been half crouching behind Su Lu, giving him advice. But because of the soft shoulder and the fragrance in his ear, Su Lu couldn't keep his usual calm. In less than half an hour, he had lost several games in a row. Fortunately, everyone was playing for fun, so he didn't lose much money. While playing cards and chatting while waiting for Tai Ziyuan, Su Lu suddenly felt that it was quite comfortable to spend the afternoon like this. Through chatting with the ladies, he also indirectly learned some details of the industry. He also knew that Lulu, who was clinging to him behind him, was only 18 years old. She was younger than him. They played cards until 2 o'clock. Gradually, the ladies were called out, but Lulu was still crouching behind Su Lu, shouting and giving orders. From time to time, she secretly pinched Su Li's eye-catching but particularly strong chest. The door opened, and the lady at the front desk poked her head in. Seeing the scene in the lounge, she couldn't help but stick out her tongue. She didn't expect to see such a happy scene. Embarrassed, she interrupted Su Li's thoughts about the game. "Your companion is waiting for you in the hall." Chapter 85. Su Lu looked at the time and exclaimed in his heart. He didn't expect Tai Ziyuan to still be able to stand up. He apologized to the girls around him and walked out. Now that the only entertainment was gone, the atmosphere in the lounge returned to its usual lazy and deathly stillness. A young lady teased Lulu, "You're usually too stubborn and offended so many customers. It's not easy for you to take a fancy to someone today, but others don't like you." The beautiful Lulu snorted and said, "I like honest students." At this moment, the door opened and an extremely tired girl walked in. She said angrily, "How can students be honest these days? I've never seen a monster with 5 extra seconds in my life." The girl who walked in was about 20 years old. She looked pure, but she couldn't be considered a national beauty. She wasn't even as beautiful as the girls in the lounge, such as the beautiful Lulu. The girl was wearing a black suit with a tight skirt that had just been painted. She looked very much like the female employees of the big companies in Linhai. She didn't look like a prostitute at all, but there was a nameplate hanging on her chest that indicated her identity. Especially at this moment, the tiredness and faint lust between her eyebrows from time to time revealed what she had done earlier. When this girl walked in, the girls in the lounge all showed sincere smiles. This was because she was an A-level member of the clubhouse, but she never gave these ordinary girls a hard time like the other A-level members. Instead, she would come to the lounge from time to time to chat with them. Lulu jumped up from the sofa and held the girl's arm. She asked excitedly, Sister Bai Chi, you're back? Oh my god, it's been almost 6 hours. Can that virgin still walk? Bai Chi was very famous in the Star Clubhouse. It wasn't because of her looks, but because of her gentleness and understanding, especially her ability in those aspects. However, when she heard Lulu's question today, a rare trace of shyness appeared on her face. At this moment, the girls in the lounge realized that Bai Chi couldn't walk anymore. Everyone couldn't help but turn pale with fright. They all thought to themselves, could that virgin be a pervert and hurt Bai Chi? However, they immediately noticed the shyness and lust in Bai Chi's eyes, and they were extremely shocked. Lulu helped her sit on the sofa in disbelief and hurriedly asked, Are you tempted? Of course, Bai Chi refused to admit it, but she had to admit, the thin and weak 17 or 18-year-old male student she received on a whim today, other than the initial awkwardness, had shown such sincere gentleness and unbelievable skills in the end. At certain moments, she wondered if she was going to fall into his gentle embrace and never wake up again. How is that possible? Bai Chi forced a smile. She wanted to erase all her feelings from the past few hours. She said, that boy is so tender. He didn't dare to do anything once he entered. He made me dance for 2 hours in a row. I almost died from exhaustion. You've been dancing for 2 hours. What are you going to do in the next few hours? Lulu mercilessly exposed her lie. She said with a smile, Is there really such a powerful person who can make you fall for him? Bai Chi's heart was slightly flustered. She raised her finger and used pride to hide the shyness and lust between her brows. She said, I don't know whose child he is, but he was too generous. In the end, he gave me a ring. Of course, I have to remember his kindness. Don't tell me it's fake. Do you have any eyesight? Bai Chi looked at the ruby ring on her finger proudly. Although the design was a little old, this ruby was definitely worth a lot of money. If she wasn't wrong, it was worth at least hundreds of thousands. Although she was an A-grade member of the clubhouse, she had never received such an expensive gift or tip. Girls liked to be pretty and loved money more. That boy was so gentle and generous. It was normal for Bai Chi to be infatuated with him for a moment. However, she didn't have enough eyesight to notice that this extremely old ruby ring was actually far more expensive than she had imagined. So what? Bai Chi's smile suddenly became slightly bitter. He'll probably do it a few more times. After we get tired of it, our lives will still be the same as before. The atmosphere in the lounge was slightly gloomy, but Lulu's smile didn't change. We rely on this to make money anyway. What's there to be depressed about? How can there be any good men in this world? It's either the kind of young master you met today, or the wooden man I met today. These are all considered good. Anyway, when I save enough money, I'll naturally stop doing this. The topic returned to the most familiar life plan. Perhaps soon, they would forget about the strange pair of students who came to visit prostitutes early in the morning. The door of the room was opened again, revealing the slightly nervous face of the receptionist. Chi-Chi, the clock that Boss Xiao just set for you has been occupied by that student. He's very angry now. Do you want to avoid him first? I'm doing things according to the rules. How can he make things difficult for me? Bai Chi didn't do anything wrong, so she wasn't afraid of the nightclub boss from Linhai. However, she immediately thought of the student who kept increasing the clock and asked nervously, Are the guests okay? I don't know. Boss Xiao won't cause trouble in the club, but it seems that he sent people to stop those 2 students. Out of the 6 hours, you must have spent 5.5 hours talking about life and ideals with her. In the bleak autumn wind, Su Lu and Tai Ziyuan walked on the quiet streets of Linhai City. Su Lu looked ahead and judged with some reluctance. Tai Ziyuan smiled. The young man's face was slightly tired after understanding and revelry. He said softly, We danced for 2 hours. He had received all kinds of education since he was young, including the matters of men and women. Today, he was only putting these theoretical knowledge into practice. Especially once he really tasted the taste of sex, His powerful mind control allowed Tai Ziyuan to carefully and beautifully enjoy everything. He didn't know how much time had passed. I'm actually more suspicious that you played cards with those prostitutes for a few hours and didn't do anything. Tai Ziyuan said gently, if this is true, then I can only suspect that you really have a big problem in that aspect. What Su Le couldn't get used to the most was that Tai Ziyuan could always speak to him in an exceptionally mature and steady tone, even if his words were very vicious. He scratched his head and said, we agreed that I would only accompany you. Aren't you tempted? Of course, a little, but you know, I have a girlfriend. If I were single and you were willing to treat me, I would naturally be happy to do something. I remember that you seem to have fallen out of love. Fallen out of love? I haven't confirmed it yet. What an honest person on the outside but a hypocrite on the inside. Tai Ziyuan, wearing a windbreaker and covering his face with a rain hat, was chatting with Su Le while waiting for a taxi on the side of the street. His thin lips were exposed outside of the hat, and together with his slightly pale cheeks, they looked particularly well-defined. The corners of his lips suddenly curled up, and there was a trace of gentleness. No matter what kind of education Tai Ziyuan had received since childhood, and what kind of shrewdness he had, after all, he was just a young man who had just become an adult. He would always reminisce for a moment about his first time making love. It was also because of this that he gradually understood the meaning of this coming-of-age ceremony arranged by his ancestors. Only when a man reached the age of 18 would he have the preliminary ability to control himself and be allowed to touch those wonderful things. Only then would he be able to truly see if he would be defeated by these wonderful and soul-devouring things. Tai Ziyuan knew that he was not a person who could be defeated by a woman's charm, but this didn't mean that he didn't want to reminisce about the wonderful things that had happened before. Thinking of the woman who had teased him gently like a cat at the beginning, then turned into a little tiger who refused to admit defeat midway, and finally turned back into a soft kitten, he felt happy. What disturbed his happy mood at this moment was a group of people who walked out of the club. Su Le could tell at a glance that those people had bad intentions, especially when he recognized the two people at the back of the crowd. He immediately pulled Tai Ziyuan behind him subconsciously. He thought that these people were here to cause trouble for him, and he always thought that Tai Ziyuan was a weak and pitiful little boy. It took Boss Xiao 3 seconds to remember who this young student who had reacted extremely quickly and stared at him vigilantly was. He couldn't help but look at the burly man beside him and said, I wanted to see who was so powerful that even Bai Qi couldn't bear to accompany you. I didn't expect it to be the person you're looking for. Hearing the familiar name of Bai Qi, Tai Ziyuan, who lowered his head and used a rain hat to cover his face, frowned and the corners of his lips slightly tightened. Su Le didn't notice Tai Ziyuan's reaction behind him. He only looked nervously at the burly man in front of him and felt a little regretful. He didn't expect to meet someone from the Zhou family here. The burly man was the friend of the Zhou family's siblings, the ruthless soldier Hook. Hook stared at Su Le's plain face and said with a smile, I know you've been hiding in university for a few months, but your luck isn't very good today. It seems that my senior brother isn't here either. Su Le could tell that Hook wouldn't let him go. He calmed his breathing and said, my classmate has nothing to do with this. Let him go first. Hook waved his hand indifferently and stared at him as if he was staring at prey. I'm not the one who wants to kill you. As for whether I'll kill you or cripple you today, I need to make a call. Zhou Yu returned to the 3rd military region and left Hook to accompany his sister. This pair of siblings had never forgotten that someone in Linhai had slapped them in the face, shot their subordinates, and made them leave in a sorry state. For such a person, such a deep humiliation could never be washed away without blood. After a while, Hook put down the phone in his hand and said, You're in luck. Yuzi said that something big has happened in Linhai recently, so you don't have to die. You only need to break one of your legs. The one in the middle. His tone was very calm, but it was this kind of calmness that made one's heart turn cold. Su Le narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at Hook's hand. Then, he helplessly realized that Hook was indeed carrying a gun at his waist. Indeed, there was no way to seek equality in a conflict with a soldier. When Tai Ziyuan heard Yuzi's name, He narrowed his eyes and shook his head. Chapter 86. Su-la knew that the other party was waiting for him to retaliate. No one would be willing to become a eunuch at such a young age. Seeing the military firearms that the other party deliberately showed him, his heart was filled with anger. What was wrong with this world? Why did these powerful people dare to treat the laws of the Federation like a bubble? What happened to the first charter that pervaded the entire Federation? Were these people not afraid of being caught? At this moment, the angry and helpless Su-la finally remembered something that Uncle Feng Yu once said. The first charter was ultimately still in effect within the framework of human society. These powerful people oppressed ordinary people, but the police would never file a case or investigate. Even if the first charter could accurately determine who was involved in these matters, what could they do? The central computer could only work passively forever. This was something that the first charter had long since stipulated. The atmosphere in the field was somewhat oppressive and tense. Hook narrowed his eyes as he looked at Su-la. He knew that this extremely ordinary-looking kid had powerful close combat abilities, so his hand was already on the handle of the gun at his waist. If the other party really dared to resist, then he would have no choice but to shoot. With the Zhou family's current status in the Federation, it would not be difficult for them to suppress this matter. Today, the Federation Investigation Bureau was not involved in this matter either. At this critical moment, Tai Ziyuan, who was wearing a windbreaker, naturally took 2 steps back, leaving Su-la alone in front of the crowd that was eyeing him covetously. Hook did not intend to make things difficult for that guy. He was not a person who liked to be jealous. If Mr. Zhao had not insisted on chasing after him to please him, then perhaps he would not have encountered Su-la and Tai Ziyuan at all. For people of the Zhou family's status, although they were tyrannical and despicable, this kind of tyranny still followed the rules. They just did not want to let Su-la and Shi Qinghai off the hook. As long as the others did not get involved, they naturally would not pay attention to them. However, in that instant, Hook suddenly felt that the young man in the windbreaker was a little strange. That windbreaker was strangely flipped over, and the corner that was blown up by the wind looked a little familiar. It looked a little like the uniform of the 4th Military Region. Hook smelled something uncomfortable and did not want to waste any more time. He took out the military pistol on his waist and said to Su-la, "I'll help you." A black car drove over from afar. It drove like a ghost in the autumn wind, crushing countless yellow leaves on the ground without making any sound. The people who were confronting each other on the side of the street were all focused on each other and did not notice this at all. In Su-la's eyes, there was only the gun in the person's hand. He narrowed his eyes very much and saw the process of the person pulling out the gun from his waist to lifting it up. He did not miss any minute movements. He pulled back his right hand and was prepared to protect Tai Ziyuan behind him, but he did not expect to grab anything. He could not help but laugh and think to himself, "This kid is too unloyal." Su-la was able to be so relaxed in this tense moment because he suddenly felt that he was very stupid. Since this society was already unfair, why should he be angry over this kind of injustice? Just like those idealists who worked hard in S2, when injustice came in front of them, other than crushing it, what else could they do? Su-la stared at Hook's hand that was holding the gun, his eyes narrowed into slits. The bottom half of his feet had already left the pavement, and his legs under his pants started to tremble slightly. That familiar warmth started to spread throughout his body. He did not know why, but in his heart, he had boundless confidence that he could knock down the person, even if the person was holding a gun. Hook's hand that was holding the gun was slightly raised, at a 45-degree angle to the ground. This was the best angle for muscles to exert force. Su-la's narrowed eyes flashed. He twisted his body, the tips of his shoes grabbing onto the hard ground, and turned into a wild bull in the autumn wind. With the fastest speed, he silently and terrifyingly charged over. A distance of 3 meters seemed very far, but under Su-la's charge, it was only a blink of an eye. Hook was an expert in the military. When Su-la started to move, he also moved. His right hand that was holding the gun was indeed as Su-la had predicted. He could not quickly adjust the angle, but but he was still able to valiantly raise the gun a little and aim it at Su Li's abdomen. At this time, Su Li had already rushed in front of him with a strong wind, and his finger was ready to pull the trigger. At such a close distance, no one could avoid this shot. Su Li's quick-thinking brain also came to the same conclusion. He knew that he had underestimated the reaction speed of a professional soldier. Even such a sudden attack did not have the effect of catching him off guard. He did not know if he would die if he was shot in the abdomen, but that strong sense of danger caused his face to instantly turn pale. All the strength in his body was concentrated in his arms. His left hand was prepared to grab Hook's right wrist, and then he would use the strength of his waist and abdomen to break the cartilage in his opponent's throat with his right fist. Under such circumstances, Su Li could no longer care about his own secrets. Killing someone was a crime. The middle finger of his right fist had already protruded, and the knuckles were white with a hint of red, looking very much like a peanut. The gunshot did not sound, and Su Li did not succeed in grabbing Hook's wrist. This was because in the quiet afternoon in Linhai, a clear sound like a bird's whistle rang out. In an instant, Hook's hand that was holding the gun turned into a pile of flesh and blood. Su Li rushed in front of him, but he did not manage to grab anything. He could not use the strength to twist his body. The direction of his right fist was slightly lower, but it did not slow down in the slightest as it ruthlessly struck Hook's chest. There was a very short period of shock and silence. Su Li's punch landed on Hook. He did not have time to think about what had just happened. He turned around and ran. He grabbed Tai Ziyuan's windbreaker and ran to the side of the street. He happened to see the black car that had silently stopped there like a ghost. He opened the car door and pushed Tai Ziyuan in as fast as he could. Su Li followed in and closed the door. He reached into his pocket and took out the metal lighter that Shi Qinghai had given him. He aimed it at the back of the driver's head and shouted, "Drive, or I'll shoot you." The driver obediently started the car and drove away from the scene as fast as he could. Su Li turned around and glanced at the street through the car window. After confirming that those people had not chased after them, he felt slightly relieved. He looked at the driver with an apologetic gaze, but he did not dare to move the lighter away. Only then did he notice that the driver's hair had already turned white. He was an old man. Tai Ziyuan, who had remained silent since the beginning of the conflict, could not help but smile when he saw Su Li aiming at the back of Butler Jin's head. He admired his friend's quick wit and courage. The autumn wind was still blowing by the side of the street, blowing the withered yellow leaves on the ground. However, it did not blow away the ghastly severed hand on the ground. Hook stared blankly at the severed hand on the ground. He was so strong that he did not fall to the ground. Instead, he subconsciously judged that the shooter was a sniper, and one of the most powerful soldiers. It was only now that he realized that he might have run into someone he couldn't afford to offend today. However, he was still thinking about Silin, and didn't consider the true identity of the silent young man behind Su Li at all. Everyone was shocked. Mr. Zhao and the other local big shots of Lin Hai looked at the broken hand on the ground in horror. They couldn't say anything for a long time. It's not that they haven't seen guns before, but they've never seen such a scene. It was only then that Hook felt a sharp pain in his chest. He remembered that he had been punched by that brat named Su Li. Then, the pain started to spread. Even with his strong willpower, he could not bear it. It was even more terrifying than the pain coming from his severed hand. This pain was tearing pain. It was like a spider web had started to spread from his chest. He did not know how many bones had started to crack and were about to break. Hook's vision went black. He fainted on the ground with a loud thud. Then, 7 black cars came over and surrounded the group of people. Mr. Zhao looked at the license plates of these cars in shock. He had completely lost all courage to resist. The black cars turned a corner. Su Li could no longer see what was happening in front of the Stars clubhouse through the rear window. He also did not see that shocking scene. At this time, he had calmed down and easily determined that before he threw that punch, someone had already shot Hook's hand that was holding the gun. Unless his mind could hurt people, there was no other explanation. "It was my bodyguard," Tai Ziyuan said calmly without waiting for him to ask. What he said was true. Sneaking out of the small villa to visit prostitutes was not a glorious thing for the heir of the Tai family. He just needed to avoid Butler Jin's nagging and report to his mother, as well as the 12 special task force agents sent by the president. He was not someone who did not know his limits. Not long after entering the clubhouse, he had already informed Butler Jin that the person who fired the gun and the 7 cars that appeared later were all the Tai family's personal bodyguards. Tai Ziyuan looked quietly at Butler Jin, who was silent in the driver's seat. Suddenly, a smile appeared on his lips. His mother had always said that the family would not specially send people to protect him. Today, it seemed that it was just an excuse. Your family's bodyguards? Su Lu repeated subconsciously. He realized that he seemed to have underestimated this kid's family background. In a society like the Federation, where guns were strictly controlled, except for the Zhou family siblings, who were children of the military, not many people could hire bodyguards who dared to shoot on the streets. To be more precise, the security companies in the Federation that could get the gun licenses were all backed by the government. They were not something that could be hired by just anyone with money. I thought you wouldn't care about my family. Tai Ziyuan smiled and said, I'll explain to you later. Please take the lighter down first. The driver is Uncle Jean, my personal butler. Butler Jean, who was in the driver's seat, smiled and did not greet Su Lu. Su Li's hand stiffly put away the lighter. He turned around and looked at Tai Ziyuan in surprise, as if trying to figure out the identity of this weak rich kid. Chapter 87. Don't look, there are no flowers on my face. There was a saying in the Federation, which roughly meant that the friendship between men was the strongest when they were schoolmates, colleagues, and prostitutes. This meant that they understood each other's most secretive things, such as body size, likes, dislikes, and dislikes. If these 3 relationships were all present, it would be difficult for these 2 men not to be strong. Tai Ziyuan and Su Lu should be considered schoolmates during those nights in H1. Although they did not go into the water together today, they knew a lot about each other's first time. Perhaps it was because of these reasons that Tai Ziyuan seemed more relaxed in front of Su Lu than before, and the faint alienation and scrutiny between his eyebrows had lessened a lot. In contrast to Tai Ziyuan's mood at this time, Su Li's heart was a little heavy. He realized that his friend seemed to have a strong background. Some people might be secretly happy that they had found a shortcut to prosperity, but some people would feel a little disappointed. After all, they were not from the same world, so how could they get along for a long time? I'm just a little worried. Su Lu said, maybe your family has a strong background, but do you know who I've offended? I heard that the father of that pair of siblings is a big shot in the Ministry of Defense. Today, he dragged you in, and your bodyguard even injured an active soldier. I'm afraid this matter will be a little difficult to handle. Tai Ziyuan smiled and did not answer this question. He said, I'm in a good mood today, so don't be disturbed by these accidents. Speaking of which, after eating your supper a few days ago and talking to you, my insomnia has improved a lot. However, I've never slept as well as I did today. I slept for 2 whole hours and didn't even dream. When Su Lu heard this, he relaxed a little. He wanted to say that after dancing for 2 hours and sleeping for 2 hours, he was still a normal person. However, when he remembered that the other party's personal butler was also in the car, he changed his words at the last minute. Drinking less coffee and thinking less is better than anything else. There are some things that you still have to think about, Tai Ziyuan said. The black car stopped at the secluded back door of Yue University. After dropping off Su Lu, the car drove into the depths of the campus in the autumn wind. Su Lu stared blankly at the black shadow of the car without any markings. He suddenly remembered that a few months ago, this car had driven into the pear garden like a ghost and almost hit Zhang Xiaoming. Driving into an inconspicuous forest, the car passed the inspection of the special task force agents hidden in the dark and entered the courtyard in front of the small villa. Tai Ziyuan didn't get out of the car. He sat calmly in the back seat. After a long silence, he said, "Give Zhou Yu a call." Butler Jean dialed a few numbers on the car phone and connected to the 3rd Military Region's switchboard. He said something in a low voice, and after listening for a while, he handed the phone to Tai Ziyuan in the back seat. Tai Ziyuan listened to Zhou Yu's surprised voice on the other end of the phone, and a mocking smile appeared on his lips. After a while, he slowly said, "The Federation is a society ruled by law. Shouldn't you and your sister restrain yourself a little?" The surprise on the other end of the phone suddenly turned into a tense silence. It was as if he was trying hard to determine what he had done wrong and what had happened in Linhai. Tai Ziyuan didn't give the other party any time to find the truth and try hard to explain. He said calmly, "I still have to study in Linhai for half a year. Don't come to Linhai for the next 6 months. Also, tell Yuzi that I'm a very nostalgic person. Don't use your glorious deeds to erase all the old memories. Don't let that person called Hook appear in front of me in the future." After saying this, Tai Ziyuan hung up the phone. Then, he put his hands behind his head and began to daydream. The occasional coming-of-age ceremony made him very happy. This kind of small disturbance wouldn't be able to make his calm and tenacious heart tremble in the slightest. However, when he heard the hooligan surnamed Zhao mention the name Bai Qi to the soldier on the street, he felt very unhappy. He carefully recalled these emotions that could be called possessiveness and jealousy. He felt more and more that his ancestors back then were really good at grasping the psychological processes of a young person. "Young master, I must report this matter to Madam," Butler Jean reported in a low voice. Tai Ziyuan nodded with his eyes closed. He felt a little tired, but the sleepiness made him feel gratified. He smiled and said, "The coming-of-age ceremony is over. No matter how much Mother scolds me, it's impossible to change this fact. A man doesn't have a penis, so naturally, I can't make another one." Hearing the young master's rare vulgar words, Butler Jean frowned slightly. He thought to himself that the student named Su Lu had really infected the young master with a lot of negative habits. However, at the same time, he could tell that the young master was in an unusually good mood today. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Today's coming-of-age ceremony didn't conform to the family's rules." Tai Ziyuan opened his eyes and said with a faint smile, "How did it not conform to the rules? Any girl at any ball at the age of 18. Haven't the rules been the same for tens of thousands of years? From the very beginning, the current successor of the Tai family had never thought of playing with love. He clearly understood that the rules of the family's coming-of-age ceremony were to tell the future generations that love was something that could be played with. Since that was the case, there was no need to play with those girls who still believed in love. Why not just go straight to prostitutes? "There wasn't a ball," Butler Jean retorted solemnly. "I made that girl dance in front of me for 2 hours. Tai Ziyuan's smile hid the smugness of his youthful nature. No one has set a rule about how many people dance in order to qualify as a ball. 2 people also counts. In the staff officer's office of the 3rd Military Region surrounded by trees, Zhou Yu, who had been promoted continuously due to his family's connections, was currently in a daze. He didn't know that the young man who had hung up the phone earlier was currently joking around in a good mood. He only felt a chill run down his spine. Many years ago, he had gotten to know his younger sister's classmate. However, at that time, he didn't expect that person to have such a profound impact on his future. Although the Tai family had never expressed their appreciation for his father, those who knew of his family's relationship with the crown prince would always intentionally or unintentionally help his father to block the thorns in his political career. The Zhou family had some foundation in the first place. However, in recent years, they had been able to receive so much respect from people at that level. What exactly did the siblings rely on to be so arrogant in this society? Why was his father, Zhou Yingxing, able to become the head of a department in the Ministry of National Defense and become a true big shot in the eyes of others? The son never needed to speak. The grasslands and living creatures on the ground were proof of his power. To Major Zhou Yu, that friend he hadn't seen in a long time, or rather, the family he hadn't really come into contact with, was the same. However, today's phone call and the words spoken by that voice were like a blizzard that chilled Zhou Yu's heart. He anxiously thought about what he and his younger sister had done to make the other party so unhappy. His younger sister and Hook were in Linhai University City. Could it be that his younger sister's fiery temper had angered the other party? But why did the other party specifically say that they didn't want to see Hook again? According to his younger sister, the other party had only given her a call and hadn't even seen her. How could they have offended her? He didn't know what he had done wrong. Even if he wanted to make up for it, he couldn't. Major Zhou fell into an extremely anxious mood. This mood only turned into rage when he saw Hook being sent home the next day. One of Hook's arms was broken. What was even more terrifying was that more than 10 of his ribs were broken. The broken bones had pierced into his lungs, and he had been coughing up blood non-stop. Even the military hospital couldn't immediately solve this problem. He had to undergo surgery to save his life. Before the surgery, Zhou, who had already learned about the details of yesterday's conflict, stared at Hook on the hospital bed with a gloomy face. He forcefully suppressed his anger and growled, "I don't care about that Su Lo. I only want to ask you one thing, did you sleep with that prostitute named Bai Qi? Did you sleep with her?" Hook coughed for a long time before he could complete his sentence, "No." When Zhou heard this answer, he felt slightly relieved. He had to admit that his analysis of men's psychology was not wrong at all. He looked at Hook with a gloomy face and said, "You're lucky. Otherwise, we might never meet again in this lifetime." This was the first time Hook had seen Zhou lose his composure like this. He vaguely guessed the true identity of the young man who had been silent the whole time yesterday. While he was shocked, he thought of something else. Zhao Ying was also present yesterday. He asked the crown prince to let him live. Those people in Linhai were Zhou's collaborators in his plan. However, when he heard this, his calm expression was exceptionally cold. He said calmly, "I can't even enter Linhai now. Why should I care about the life and death of those people? If their deaths can make him feel better, I'll bring a platoon of soldiers to do it myself." Boss Zhao, who ran the largest nightclubs in Linhai, did not die. After he witnessed the shooting incident at noon that day, he was sent to the police station by people who did not know his exact identity. While he was in a state of panic, he found out the bad news that several nightclubs under his company had been raided at the same time that night. It was said that this operation was jointly launched by the Linhai State Police Headquarters and the Customs Narcotics Division. They successfully found a new drug, Sky Blue, in those nightclubs. Tai Ziyuan did not know about this matter. With the status of the Tai family, they would not put too much effort into a mere underground society in Linhai. There were people who specialized in this kind of thing in the small teams led by Butler Jean that specialized in serving the young master. Even a peripheral staff member of the Tai family could easily do this, so Butler Jean did not know the specific process. He only instructed those staff members to do things according to the law. That night, Butler Jean personally came to Star Clubhouse to visit the girl who helped the young man complete his coming-of-age ceremony. At this time, one of the people involved in the great change in Linhai with Su Lo, the clubhouse's A-list Miss Bai Qi, had no idea what had happened. Chapter 88. Although she was a little worried about the young, gentle, and rich, bad boy, Bai Qi didn't know if Boss Zhao had let him go. When they found out about the shooting at the entrance of the clubhouse, the police had already arrived. After the shooting, Star Clubhouse only closed for 3 hours before reopening. It had to be said that the owner behind this clubhouse was a very powerful figure in Linhai. Bai Qi frowned slightly. She thought of the boy who had watched her dance for 2 hours and tormented her until she was at a loss like a young girl. She felt a little uneasy when she thought of his sweet face as he fell asleep in her arms. However, she was only a woman who made a living at the bottom of society. Other than asking around, it was impossible for her to have the intention to help him. She wasn't used to staying in her own lounge. Although it was exclusive to high-class prostitutes like her, she always felt that it was too quiet. It was the lounge where Su Lu had been playing cards all afternoon. Everyone felt a little strange tonight. After the incident in the afternoon, it was expected that the clubhouse's business would be much worse at night. However, it was almost 8 o'clock, and no one had rung Bai Chi's clock yet. "Chi-Chi, come to the general manager's office." A gentle voice came from the communicator. It seemed to be the boss's voice. The girls in the lounge became nervous and glanced at Bai Chi. Bai Chi smiled bitterly. She didn't know what had happened, but she went straight to the third floor. The third floor was reserved for the boss. Bai Chi had only been there once during the signing of the contract. When she came in tonight, she saw an old man with a head of white hair. The boss, who was usually extremely cold, was now pouring tea for the old man in an extremely humble manner. Bai Chi was slightly stunned. Could it be that he wanted her to serve this old man? Butler Jean heard footsteps and turned his head. He looked at Bai Chi from head to toe seriously as if he was looking at a piece of art. At some point, the boss of the clubhouse quietly left. Only Bai Chi and Butler Jean were left in the room. Bai Chi had been immersed in the entertainment industry for a long time and had seen countless men. However, when faced with this old man's gaze, she began to feel nervous. She felt that under his calm gaze, she wasn't wearing any clothes at all. She was naked like a baby. After a long time, Butler Jean nodded in satisfaction and asked gently, "How long have you been in this business?" "A year and a half, for some reason," Bai Chi answered nervously. "I've seen your medical report. You're a very meticulous girl." Butler Jean smiled and said, "Don't be nervous, I'm just here to see you. Do you remember that young man from this morning?" "I remember." Bai Chi became more and more nervous. "That's my young master." Butler Jean took out an envelope from the pocket of his suit and instructed, "So, from today onwards, you don't have to do this anymore. The address on the envelope is for your accommodation from now on. There's also a check inside, it's a token of our family's gratitude." Bai Chi did not understand the meaning of this sentence and looked at the old man in a daze. Butler Jean paused for a moment before saying with a smile, "I hope you don't misunderstand. We don't want to control your life. You're free to fall in love. If that's the case, please return this key. If you're willing to wait for young master's arrival in that house, please move into that house." Butler Jin's brows furrowed slightly as he said, "However, I hope that you can make a careful and long-term decision. If you decide not to live in that house, please inform me in advance. I don't want anything unpleasant to happen. Trust me." After Butler Jean was done with this matter, he looked at her with a gentle smile and said softly, "You're the luckiest girl in the Federation in the past 20 years. His words were very gentle, but it made Bai Chi feel endless pressure and nervousness. She didn't even know when Butler Jean left, nor did she hear his last sentence clearly. She walked back to the lounge in a daze. Looking at the chattering sisters who were asking her questions, she finally remembered to look at the envelope. The first thing she saw was the address on the envelope. She recognized at a glance that this address was the Huayuan district, the most expensive district in Linhai. She couldn't help but gasp. When she opened the envelope, she saw the check. She nervously began to count the zeros behind the number. She counted for a long time until she felt that her eyes must be playing tricks on her. Every zero was like a small hammer of happiness, hitting Bai Chi's numb heart. Her hands trembled as she held the key and the check. When she thought of the virgin man she had received this morning, her eyes went dark and she fainted happily. The problem lay in Area H1. Su Lo rested his chin on his hand and leaned against the edge of the black mecha's operating cabin. He looked at the high ceiling above his head and thought to himself. It had been so many days. Other than him and Tai Ziyuan, no other students had entered, at least at night. This phenomenon had long attracted his attention. Even if it was the most advanced laboratory in Yue University, it was impossible for only him and Tai Ziyuan to have access to it. It seemed that Area H1 was not an ordinary place. That kid surnamed Feng was indeed not an ordinary person. Su Lo subconsciously touched the back of his neck where the chip was planted. Ordinary citizens of the Federation had long treated the chip in their bodies as an organ that accompanied them for the rest of their lives. There was no rejection, no curiosity, and sometimes they couldn't even think about it, let alone touch it. He was different. The back of his neck was planted with a fake chip. Moreover, there were many chips in the metal bracelet on his left hand. Since the fake chip in his body could enter Area H1, which was not an ordinary place, it meant that the chip's creator, Uncle Fengyu, had written into the chip. That was why Area H1's identification system gave the chip permission to pass through. Su Le scratched his head with a headache. He did not have a coffee cup in his hand. The operating program of the first charter was completely open and transparent. It was impossible for the chip in the human body to be written into. It could only be identified by the three-layer surveillance network and given different permissions. Su Le knew how Uncle Fengyu did all this, but he also thought that since he could even make fake chips, anything that went against the common sense or laws of mankind might not be a big deal in front of Uncle Fengyu. Tonight, Tai Ziyuan did not come to Area H1. Su Le waited for a long time, but the voice on the intercom did not ring. Maybe the other party did not know how to answer his question. Su Le frowned and smiled helplessly. He was indeed very curious about the identity of the other party, but in fact, he was more worried. He always thought that his boring conflict with the Zhou siblings had dragged the weak Tai Ziyuan into it. He did not know if the other party's family would be in trouble. After pondering in silence for a long time, Su Le gave up thinking about the chip behind his neck in Area H1. He began to think about these friends he had met in Yue University this year. He did not know why, but he always had a depressing thought, just like when he was with Zhang Xiaoming. Maybe from today onwards, that rich boy who liked to eat deep-fried pancakes would disappear from his life. He comforted himself. After all, they were not from the same world. It was not bad to have been together before. It had to be said that Su Le, who had grown up in the remote and desolate Donglin district, still had a vague sense of inferiority in his bones. It was especially so after he came to the capital ring. The buildings, the equipment in the laboratories, the people, and the things that happened reminded him that he was actually just a bumpkin. Even though his mechanical engineering practice classes were better than those of the official students, and even though he had few friends, they all seemed to have extraordinary backgrounds. It was because of this inferiority that he was so strong and stubborn in front of Zhang Xiaoming. It was completely uncharacteristic of his sharp tongue. When he thought of Zhang Xiaoming, the lights in Area H1 dimmed a lot in Su Le's eyes. He stared listlessly at the soft white light emitted by the ceiling lights. His hands were quickly assembling something beside him. He did not even look at it. His hands were assembling an antique simulation system. He had spent 1 million Federation coins to order this from the Shell Motor Company. Thanks to the Federation's smooth logistics channels, this antique system was in his hands in only half a day. The manual and schematic were already engraved in his mind. Relying on the metallic sensation from his fingertips, he quickly assembled the parts together. It was as if he was not worried at all that he would make a mistake. 1 million Federation coins was enough to buy a very good apartment in Linhai. When he heard the signal beep 3 times, Su Le knew that the assembly was a success. However, he was thinking about this sentence in his mind. This 1 million was the money in the 3 Linlin United Bank card that the uncle had left him. He had originally planned to save it to buy a house for himself and Zhang Xiaoming in the future. However, it seemed that the female owner of the room had suddenly changed her mind. Therefore, he silently and angrily ordered this system. He was not one of those women. Spending all the money in his hands did not make his gloomy mood any better. Putting aside the simulation system that was as soft as skin but heavier than a wrestler, he opened his backpack and took out the electronic components that he had prepared for several months. He silently began to assemble another tool. This time, Su Le was clearly much more careful. He gently pushed on the metal bracelet. A faint beam of light shot out and projected an extremely detailed and complicated schematic diagram on the smooth inner surface of the mech. He stared at the schematic diagram and seriously assembled the components that were removed from the various common Federation tools in his hands. He did not even blink. He was very serious. Su Le was in a bad mood. 50% of it was because of Zhang Xiaoming, 30% was because of what happened today in Tai Ziyuan, and the remaining 20% was because of his fear. He didn't know where he was going to go in the future. There was a fire burning in his heart, but he couldn't find a way to vent it. Habit became second nature. He seemed to have returned to the operations room in the Donglin district mine pit. He lowered his head and focused on repairing everything that he could. In that microscopic and quiet world where no one could disturb him, he calmed his emotions. Time gradually passed as he focused on his work. He did not know that the sky outside was almost bright, and he also did not know that in Yue University's gymnasium, which was only a wall away from Area H1, preparations for the next day's mecha show had already begun. The mecha show by those proud and confident military officers from the Federation's first military academy. Chapter 89. In the beam data stored in the metal bracelet, Uncle Feng Yu had not left behind any earth-shattering designs. There was no super-strong mecha design that surpassed the M52 by several generations, and there was also no secret manual that would allow Su Lu to become one of the top mecha engineers in the Federation one day. Thus, Su Lu could only start learning from the most basic parts in Yue University. Although he studied very hard, to the point of being very hungry, according to his judgment, he would need at most another half a year to learn everything he wanted to learn. However, the blueprints in the bracelet made Su Lu very happy for a long time. If he could successfully assemble this tool, the blue light would light up again, and he would once again have the shocking ability to isolate himself from the Federation's surveillance for half an hour. Su Lu knew where his abilities lay, and he was also used to seeking self-recognition and that heavy sense of accomplishment from these aspects. After a long time, Su Lu turned off the data screen output system on the metal bracelet. After staying in Area H1 for many nights and confirming that there were no surveillance devices here, he dared to use his biggest secret without worry. The coarse high-energy plastic casing in his hand was densely packed with chipsets and activators. It really did not look like a high-end device. Su Lu carefully checked every metal circuit on the bracelet and nodded with satisfaction. Most of the work had been completed. Perhaps it would not be long before this crude instrument in Su Li's hand would once again light up with blue light. He would once again be able to freely cross that electronic fence and enter those wild wildlife-protected areas. Under the surveillance of HTD, he would silently carry out his work of slaughtering cows. The only problem was that there were a few restricted components that Su Lu could not find any way to obtain at the moment. Regarding these matters, the black market on the internet would not be able to gain his trust. After working for half the night, he had successfully used up most of his energy. A strong sense of fatigue overwhelmed him, and he no longer had the energy to think about anything related to Zhang Xiameng. His head rested on the soft and highly resistant outer layer of the mecha's control cabin, and he fell into a deep sleep. After an indeterminate amount of time, an extremely strange noise woke him up from those colorful dreams. He rubbed his eyes, feeling a little strange. It was early in the morning, so why would someone disturb his peace? Moreover, Area H1 had always been quiet. His gaze swept towards the direction of the noise, and Su Lu was instantly shocked. This was because he saw two long mechanical arms suddenly extend out from the platform wall behind the mecha, grabbing at him. He instinctively tried to escape from the control cabin, but when the soles of his shoes had already stepped on the smooth surface of the mecha, he remembered that his backpack, the antique simulation system that cost him 1 million, and that little blue light instrument that absolutely could not be seen by others were still in the control cabin. Without spending too much time thinking, he pounced back, but then he sadly found that he had misjudged the operating speed of those two long mechanical arms. When he turned back, he saw a black shadow covering the control cabin door, blocking all of his line of sight. There was a loud sound of electric current flowing from the mechanical arm. It was the sound of alloy components colliding. Su Lu looked in front of him in shock. The originally empty surface of the operation cabin was now equipped with a translucent door armor. Then he heard an unfamiliar electronic voice, "Pilot, please take your position." The seat of the control cabin automatically extended a strap, binding Su Li's body securely to the seat. At this time, he had already shaken off his previous panic and confirmed that he could leave the strap at any time. Slightly relieved, he listened curiously to the electronic synthetic voice. Request for battle training, accept. The electronic synthetic voice rang out. Su Lu was taken aback. Could it be that the origin of chaos had returned? But why wasn't the holographic screen displaying the virtual scene today, and why was the mechanical arms automatically fitted with translucent armor? Could it be that they were going to engage in real-life training? Thinking of this possibility, he suddenly felt a little excited, and the fire that he had been suppressing all this time began to rise. The young fugitive Su Lu had been holding back for a very long time. After experiencing the taste of sex for the first time, he had suffered a major emotional setback. After waiting for Tai Ziyuan for a few more hours in Star's clubhouse, he was almost drunk from all that fragrance, but there was no outlet for the fire in his body to vent. Even if he focused on his work for half a night, there was no way to calm all his emotions. If the Tai family's bodyguard had not made a move, perhaps Su Li's current state of mind would have been much calmer. But there were no ifs. At this time, Su Lu really wanted to operate the giant alloy mecha and have a good fight with anyone. He thought for a while, scratched his head, and then randomly said, "Okay." Following his agreement, the ribbon-like data cables and power cables floating behind the Black M prototype mecha all retracted back into the thick wall, and the platform's control panel slowly turned the mecha around. Su Lu stared blankly at the wall that was gradually splitting in two through the translucent protective shield of the mecha's control panel. Only now did he know that behind Area H1 was actually an exit made entirely of alloy. The door opened, and in the bright white light, a lone blue-black mecha was waiting for him in the incomparably spacious battle room. There was no audience, no cheers. Although the blue-black mecha was lonely, it exuded a heart-stopping chill. Moreover, the mecha coldly extended its alloy thumb, arrogantly aimed at the ground. Yue University's comprehensive gymnasium looked very normal from the outside, but the building space inside was exceptionally large. This was a rare place in the entire university town where mecha battle training could take place. The university town belonged to the Federation's education system, so very few schools would be involved in the military. Yue University being able to have such a mecha training area was something that many people could not understand. Today's comprehensive gymnasium was exceptionally lively. Outside the gymnasium, a virtual 3D screen was constantly flashing with greetings to the guests, as well as the flow of this exchange between the two academies. Of course, most of it was an introduction to the first military academy. The main entrance of the comprehensive gymnasium had the words, "Welcome," written on it. Who knew whose idea it was to come up with such a shabby method? At this time, there were no longer any Yue University students who were still watching the introduction to the first military academy on the screen. This was because as long as one was a citizen of the Federation, there was no one who did not know the name of the third academy. Most of the students, including the professors and students of the other academies in the university town, had already taken their seats in the comprehensive gymnasium, excitedly preparing to watch the mecha performance of the first military academy's visiting team. The third academy was the three major military academies jointly managed by the Ministry of National Defense and the Ministry of Education, entrusted by the President's Security Affairs Committee of the Federation. They were located in the three most important administrative districts of the capital ring. Among them, the one with the longest history and the most resounding reputation was naturally the first military academy located on the outskirts of the capital special district of the Federation. During the barbaric era when the galaxy was being developed, during the bloody war with the Empire, the first military academy had produced countless famous generals and generals. Whether it was in the military or in the Federation society, they all held a high position. Even if this military academy had produced a high-scoring but immoral hoodlum like Shi Qinghai, its image would not be tarnished in the slightest. Shi Qinghai looked at a quiet area in the comprehensive gymnasium and narrowed his eyes slightly. Soldiers armed with live ammunition were protecting two mechas covered in green dust shields. However, the bodies of the two mechas were so huge that anyone could tell what they were at first glance. On paper, there were only around 400 mecha in the entire Federation. Not everyone had the chance to see this war machine, which was known as the most artistic and violent war machine, with their own eyes. The students of Yue University looked at the two mecha covered from head to toe with envy and excitement. If they were not afraid of the soldiers with guns, perhaps they really would have sneaked over to touch them. Shi Qinghai's reason for staring was naturally different from these students. Although he was not a student of the mecha department, he had studied at the first military academy for 4 years, so naturally he had come into contact with mechas. He was only thinking about why the first military academy had chosen to conduct an exchange visit during the Double Moon Festival. Yale University was indeed a very good university, but compared to the first military academy, it was really nothing. If the first military academy had chosen to conduct an exchange visit at the capital university, perhaps it would have been more understandable. Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes and looked at the few familiar faces on the rostrum. Looking at those junior brothers wearing military academy uniforms with stern expressions, he could not help but laugh. He thought to himself that if the purpose of this mecha demonstration was to prove to the Crown Prince that the first military academy was much better than Yale University, these juniors' expressions were a little too cocky. The students of the first military academy were naturally proud, and they had the right to be proud. Shi Qinghai fished out a cigarette from his wrinkled suit pocket and lit it. He was a little lost in thought. A few years ago, perhaps his expression was even more cocky than these brats. For today's exchange event, the first military academy had generously used a military transport aircraft to transport 3 mecha from the capital. At this time, 2 of the mecha were still quietly sitting in the dust-proof enclosure, while one of them had already entered the combat room to perform some mecha operations demonstrations. For safety reasons, the combat room in the corner of the multi-purpose hall was designed to be completely enclosed. Everything that happened inside would be transmitted to a large screen for the viewing of the students in the multi-purpose hall. Shi Qinghai raised his head and looked at the blue-black mecha performing elegant dodging movements on the screen. The corners of his lips curled up in a mocking smile. He thought to himself that Yale University did not even have a mecha department. This idiot's performance was so flashy, other than attracting scolding, what else could he do? Yale University could not possibly ask a bunch of male students to hit him with baseball bats. Chapter 90. For some reason, ever since a long time ago, when the 5-man group had established the foundations of various areas of human society, the design of mecha had always been habitually and naturally drawn closer to the human body. There were very few mecha that mimicked ecology, such as spiders or snakes. Perhaps those types of mecha were too ugly and did not fit the aesthetic standards of human soldiers, or perhaps it was because scientists had finally discovered that more support points would inevitably sacrifice the subjective initiative and mobility of humans when operating them. In any case, as science progressed, mecha began to look more and more like humans. It was just that those seemingly indestructible armor and power systems allowed mecha to display strength that was far more terrifying than a human's body. Mecha operation also had a style. This was reflected in countless details, such as the walking curve of a slide, or the necessary height for a leap, or that glance when a mecha tilted its head. Using the words of a traitorous mecha mechanic from the former Second Military Academy, what the hell was the difference between a pilot who had not developed a mecha operation style and driving a car? The blue-black mecha on the screen clearly had a strong operation style, and that was flirtatious. In the short 45 seconds of mecha operation practice, the blue-black mecha had twisted its waist a total of 8 times, stomped its feet a total of 5 times, and even raised its mechanical arm twice to aim at the sky in between. It had to be said that this first military academy student operating the mecha had very strong control ability. Even with so many lewd little tricks added to the mix, the mecha had still not made a single mistake in the entire set of set movements, perfectly passing the 3rd level of the test. Shi Qinghai stared at the screen, which was split into 2 sections. One section showed the actual movements of the blue-black mecha in the mecha combat room, while the other was a 2D display of the 3rd level mecha test footage. Those little movements of the blue-black mecha all became very real mockery and ridicule in his eyes. However, he was not a student of Yale University. Presumably, none of the professors and students of Yale University would be able to understand what kind of emotions that flashy mecha was currently displaying in vain. Right then, he was guessing which building on campus that Crown Prince should be watching this mecha performance specially organized for him alone. And after the organization found out that Crown Prince was at your university, when exactly would they take action, and what kind of action would they take? No matter if it was to find a way to get in contact with the other party, to seek the support of the power behind the other party, or to carry out the anti-government army's plan to kill this person, it should not be today. Today, your university's security could be said to be tight. Right at this moment, a female student from your university beside Shi Qinghai excitedly muttered to herself, "So cool," as expected of a top student from the first military academy. "This mecha looks like it's alive." The male students beside the female students were also very envious of these war machines that were full of violent beauty. However, after hearing this sentence, their expressions became a little strange. Male animals could praise the same sex with grace, but they were never willing to let the opposite sex beside them praise other males. A trace of sympathy welled up in Shi Qinghai's heart. He said with a smile, "Stretching is considered handsome." The female student from your university glared at the guy and said, "What are you talking about? That's the operation of passing the level 3 test. It means that the officer in the mecha is holding back. It's so effortless." Shi Qinghai shrugged and did not argue with her. Instead, it was the male student who came over and asked seriously, "I also feel that there's something wrong with the attitude of that kid in the mecha. He seems to be quite arrogant. What do you see? Gu Haijun has a flag language, but mecha also have a machine language. After all, during battle, if you scold the opponent over the communication device, it would appear tasteless. Moreover, it would be easy for the monitoring instructor to find out, so the First Academy's mecha department has always had a tradition of using machine language to scold others." Shi Qinghai recalled his school days and could not help but laugh. Those twisting and swinging movements are all scolding words in the First Academy. The stretch at the end is even more vulgar. I heard that the First Academy's mecha department's tradition has now entered the military. All the mecha warriors in the military know this move. Before every battle, they would scold each other to no end. The male student was stunned. He did not know if this person in a wrinkled suit was telling the truth. His eyes turned a few times, but before he could speak, Shi Qinghai said with a heavy expression, "Many people know this. I believe that some of the professors on the rostrum know this too. Besides, such an arrogant idiot coming to our school to perform a mecha. If this isn't a slap in the face, then what is?" The male student suddenly understood. He smiled meaningfully and patted Shi Qinghai on the shoulder. Then, with a serious expression, he turned around and repeated Shi Qinghai's words to his close friends. At this time, Shi Qinghai had already left his seat. As for why he had exposed the machine language of that blue-black mecha, only he himself knew. The first military academy's exchange students had actually arrived the day before yesterday. These students all had the status of military officers. They were serious in speech and manner, and their faces were cold and stern. In the eyes of the female students of your university, this was a handsome and mature expression. But in the eyes of the male students, it was unavoidably a little too arrogant and cold. The male students of the university town all liked mecha, but no one liked someone who was even more arrogant than themselves. Moreover, among those exchange students, there were occasionally one or two fellows with a face full of smiles. Those smiles were all directed at the female students, obviously harboring no good intentions. Therefore, the male students of your university had been suppressing their anger for a long time. At this time, they heard that the performing blue-black mecha was using a machine language they did not know to humiliate the students and teachers of your university, in a campus filled with the hormones of youth. White clothes fluttering in the wind, basically nothing could be tolerated, let alone this kind of bone-deep humiliation. Angry emotions spread along with this rumor. In less than a few minutes, the thousands of people in the stands showed signs of boiling. Suddenly, a male student cursed loudly at the blue-black mecha on the giant screen. Like a spark splashed into a pot of oil, it instantly ignited the anger of all the male students of your university. Countless profanities covered up the explanation coming from the control system, and resounded throughout the entire comprehensive gymnasium. Is what the students said true? The principal of your university did not know. Hearing the voices coming from all directions, he could not help but frown slightly as he asked Professor Zhou sitting behind him. Professor Zhou came from the military, so he was naturally no stranger to this machine language used by military hooligans. His old face had long since darkened. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, he glared at the middle-aged man in military uniform beside the principal and nodded his head. Unbeknownst to him, the principal took a light breath, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The fingers of his right hand began to lightly tap on the table of the rostrum, revealing his true feelings. A few days ago, when he went to the Ministry of Education for a meeting, he was shocked to find that the ministry had actually arranged for the first military academy to come for an exchange visit. Having been in the education world for more than 20 years, he naturally guessed what the first military academy was preparing to do at the first moment. After sneering, he could only agree. However, he did not expect that those student officers of the first military academy who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth would actually dare to play their little tricks in front of thousands of people. Beside him, the head of the first military academy's maneuver department, Professor Sun, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and explained in a low voice, "This is a misunderstanding. The first military academy's level was far higher than your university. For this exchange, the first military academy was led by Professor Sun. His level just so happened to be the same as that of the principal. For the first military academy to arrange it this way, it could be said that they were placing great importance on this exchange." Professor Sun originally did not have the slightest fear towards the principal, but when he thought of the principal's warning to be cautious before coming, he began to break out in cold sweat. Especially when he saw that damned blue-black mecha on the screen, still playing with those machine language that he thought no one knew. Professor Sun's mood became even more complicated. Yes, he also did not understand why the principal arranged for this exchange to be held. Like those student officers who had their holidays wasted, he also looked down on your university. However, at this moment, the general library was filled with curses, giving him a great deal of pressure. Principal Tsong suddenly smiled warmly and said, "The students of the first military academy are indeed a little arrogant. Looks like they are actually not willing to come to Linhai for this exchange. As teachers, it's best for us not to force them, don't you think?" These words had hidden needles in them. Professor Sun frowned slightly, and the inherent arrogance of the first military academy flared up again. He said in a low voice, "This is just a misunderstanding. After all, this is not a battle practice. Student Anda's mecha operation has always been lacking in some small areas. When we get down later, I will properly educate him." Principal Tsong returned to his silence, ignoring him. He only smiled slightly as he listened to the thousands of vulgarities in the general library, not minding them at all. The vulgarities gradually shifted from the blue-black mecha to the first military academy, extremely vicious. On the rostrum, the expressions of those professors and outstanding student representatives from the first military academy also gradually turned ugly. The young officer who had been standing behind Professor Sun suddenly left the rostrum and came to the side of the two mecha. He turned on his communicator and spoke into the completely sealed-off combat room, "Restrain yourself a little. The students outside know the meaning of your machine language and are already starting to make a ruckus." In the blue-black mecha's control room, that curly-haired soldier was yawning in boredom. This outstanding student from the first military academy was called Anda. He was one of the students with the most outstanding results in the mecha department. This time, he had sacrificed his holiday to come to this kind of lousy place to perform. He was already in an extremely bad mood, always feeling like he was a striptease in a nightclub. When he heard the voice from the communicator, he was momentarily unable to react. He scolded, "What are those idiots making a ruckus about?" Chapter 91. For Anda, the third-level test, which had not entered a complete state, was not difficult at all. Passing the mecha was becoming more and more like a performance in that kind of relaxed and boring operation. And the mecha operation that the first military academy was proud of, was used to kill the enemy on the battlefield, not to dance for those idiots to see. Thus, Anda was in a terrible mood, very angry, and subconsciously expressed his emotions through the movements of his mecha. This was completely just his personal way of venting, but he had not expected that this would be a great disrespect to the students of the university town who had originally come to watch the First Military Academy's performance in high spirits, because in his opinion, these civilian students who had never even touched the surface of Mecha before were at most some pretty boys who only knew how to read motorsport magazines. How could they know anything about Mecha and the like? Hearing the steady and cold voice from the communicator, Enda cursed and finally came to his senses. The one speaking was Officer Zhou Yu, the strongest guy in the First Military Academy's motorsport faculty, and also his personal boss. Of course, he would not doubt the other's words. Immediately after, he heard those tide-like curses coming from the communicator, and Enda was stupefied, not knowing what to do next. On the large screen on the multipurpose gymnasium's dome, that blue-black mecha stood stupidly in its original spot. It did not report to its instructor that the performance was over, but it did not leave either. This further incited the university students to curse the other, because in their opinion, this blue-black mecha's stupidity was really asking for a scolding. Twist, twist some more. I'll break your waist and sell you to the Empire as a prostitute. Are you a transvestite from Bermuda? A faint light enveloped Enda's face. He listened dumbfoundedly to the endless stream of curses coming from the communicator, his heart filled with shock. The students in the First Military Academy were all soldiers. A single word of disagreement was enough to cause them to break out in a fight. Where had he ever heard so many different curses? His face began to flush red, almost unable to control his emotions that were about to explode. When he finally heard the word transvestite, he finally could not hold it in anymore and angrily pressed the button on the main communicator. A bunch of idiots. All you know how to do is talk. What use do the Federation have for trash like you? If you have the guts, get a mecha and fight me. Enda's angry curses rang out through the communicator from the speakers beside the holographic screen in the multipurpose gymnasium, echoing throughout the entire spacious building. Although the instructors from Yale University and the First Military Academy who were in charge of the mecha performance control in the central control room reacted at the first instance and cut off this brainless fellow's angry curses, they had only managed to cut off the words "last fight." Yale University Gymnasium instantly fell into a deathly silence. Countless pairs of eyes stared at the completely sealed mecha combat room. If the combat room had not been constructed using super strong alloy, it would have long since melted under the fury of the crowd. This was Yale University's home ground, yet the exchange student from the First Military Academy was so arrogant. Who could tolerate it? Although everyone knew that no one would be able to accept Enda's enraged challenge, the university students naturally had their own logic to consider the problem. They thought to themselves, the Federation government fucking sent all these rare mecha to your third academy and the Westwoods Military Academy. We won't even be able to touch a single one in our lifetime, and you actually dare to challenge us? This was equivalent to someone with a girlfriend challenging a bachelor to the length of time they could have sex. It was equally intolerable. After an extremely short period of absolute silence, there was a sudden outburst of emotions. Even if there were still many students who had maintained their respect for the First Military Academy before, at this moment, that respect had long since disappeared. Furthermore, Yale University had always been one of the schools where George Carlinism was most prevalent, so they did not have any good feelings towards the Federation's lackeys from the Third Academy. Fuck your mother. This was a very simple and crude reply. Get a mecha to fuck. Yo, this is the first time I've found out that you can actually have sex while using a mecha. Is this a tradition in your school? I find it strange. How can you have sex while wearing a mecha? Are you going to put on a show for us? This was a very sarcastic reply. The problem is, I heard that the First Military Academy's mecha department only has boys. This was an even more vicious heckler. A same-sex mecha sex performance? That's too fucking rare. The students in the university town could not fight, but when it came to sarcasm, how could those natural-born military officers of the First Military Academy be able to resist? Caught in a frenzy, Enda was so stifled that his entire face was red. He had completely forgotten that there was no mecha department in a university, much less something like a mecha. He stubbornly pressed a green button in the system and sent out a battle request to any mecha in Yale University's central control network. After doing all this, Enda foolishly waited for someone to accept the challenge, but in the end, after a long time, he found that there was no response. He smugly keyed in a command, and the blue-black mecha extended a thumb towards the sky. He cursed heartily, "A bunch of little brats, scolding to your heart's content. Why is there no one who dares to come out?" The main comm system had already been shut down, so the students watching the battle room through the screen naturally did not know what he was saying. However, the thousands of people had noticed the mecha's action at the same time, that big thumb pointing up at the sky. Outside the battle room, Zhou, who had been paying attention to the commotion inside, laughed bitterly. He thought to himself that every time Enda went crazy, even he could not stop him. This brat was probably still proud that no one from Yue University dared to challenge him, but he had completely forgotten that Yue University did not have mecha at all. Looking at that upturned metal thumb of the mecha, the cursing in the comprehensive gymnasium gradually subsided. This was not some machine language, this was a very clear hand signal. The students of Yue University were not so naive as to think that the idiot from year 1 would repent after being scolded by these people and give them a thumbs up to praise them. They all knew that something was definitely going to happen later, so they all began to hastily search for weapons under their seats. Sure enough, that smug and extremely annoying blue-black mecha on the screen suddenly changed its aura, becoming incomparably arrogant and cold. It slowly turned its right mechanical arm upside down, its thumb pointing towards the ground. This was also not a machine language, but a very clear hand signal, a hand signal of contempt and contempt. After a moment of silence, the people in the comprehensive gymnasium burst into an uproar. Countless shoes were seen flying towards the screen, towards the mecha battle room set up underground. A male student from a class suddenly discovered a baseball bat placed behind his seat, and instantly transformed into a grenade launcher, throwing it down madly. For a moment, the wooden bats fell like rain, landing on the metallic battle room. The clinking sounds were like raindrops falling onto lotus leaves, crisp and moving. However, that blue-black mecha on the screen was still smug, its thumb pointing upwards coldly, as if it was continuously slapping the faces of the Yue University students. Right at this moment, the angry voices in the comprehensive gymnasium suddenly dwindled, replaced by countless shocked shouts and overjoyed cries. On the rostrum, those professors from the 2 academies who felt ashamed of themselves looked towards the screen in astonishment. Outside the battle room, those officers from the 1st Military Academy also looked towards the screen in confusion. On the screen, the alloy wall in the deepest part of the battle room suddenly opened slowly, and a somewhat clumsy-looking black mecha slowly revealed its body. Following the appearance of this black mecha, all the discussions and curses stopped, and the comprehensive gymnasium fell into a deathly silence. That was especially so for the Yue University students. They stared at that mecha in disbelief, wondering if their eyes were playing tricks on them. Professor Chang of the 1st Military Academy glanced at Principal Tsong beside him in shock. He had no idea that Yue University even had mecha. The principal's pupils constricted at first, but a moment later, he revealed a knowing smile. In the eyes of everyone on the rostrum, this smile could not help but appear somewhat enigmatic. When the black mecha on the screen saw the blue-black mecha's thumb pointing downwards, it seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then, facing the blue-black mecha, it raised its middle finger. This was not some sort of machine language. This was a common gesture used by both the Federation and the Empire, a gesture that all children above the age of 3 knew. The comprehensive gymnasium was filled with thunderous applause. The Yue University students were very gratified. Although some of the more knowledgeable students could see that this black mecha was only an M-series prototype and was no match for the opponent's M37, they were already very happy that it was able to point its finger at someone. Inside the black mecha, Sulu did not know that there were thousands of people watching his every move through the screen. He had just woken up and accepted the battle request, and then saw the hand gesture of the mecha behind the door. The one sitting inside the mecha was not Tai Ziyuan, so it was probably an exchange student from the 1st Military Academy. Sulu very simply came to this conclusion, and then even more simply used his middle finger to reply to the other's insulting hand gesture. This was because he had been in a very bad mood these past few days. Sulu thought that this was just an enclosed battle space with no spectators, so he acted very naturally. Through the communicator, he gave the other the order to start. This was his first time operating a mecha in a real battle. He thought to himself that with his level 6 skill of over 10 seconds, of course he would not be a match for these geniuses of the military academy. He only wanted to fight to his heart's content, even if he had to suffer a little. The black mecha looked clumsy, but in reality, its path forward was the most standard straight line, without the slightest deviation. In addition, Sulu was currently in a very bad mood, so the mecha's operation had an inexplicable sense of heroism. The distance of 20 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. The black mecha's extremely swift and fierce kick landed directly on the base of the blue-black mecha's mechanical leg. The blue-black mecha fell backwards in disbelief, smashing onto the alloy floor with a loud boom. Inside the black mecha, Sulu stared thoughtfully at the display on the screen, wondering how the opponent had fallen just like that. Although he was very satisfied with the fury, speed, and accuracy of his kick, it had also confirmed that the M37's balance sensor hidden at the base of the mechanical leg would cause a momentary deviation when struck at a 42-degree angle, thus causing the mecha's balance control system to temporarily malfunction. But why hadn't this blue-black mecha resisted? Sulu was perplexed, unable to believe that a rookie like himself could knock down a top student of the first military academy. Could it be that the opponent was a rookie among rookies? Chapter 92. For Anda, an outstanding military officer from the 1st Military Academy's Mecha Department, his trip to Yale University in year 66 of the constitutional calendar was an unerasable stain on the very beginning of his career as a professional soldier. This stain would follow him throughout his life, and would be brought up from time to time. This was because later on, everyone in the Federation knew that the Sulu in the black mecha opposite him was just a rookie who had participated in a real battle for the first time. At that time, Anda had been operating the blue-black mecha, and under the gazes of tens of thousands of people, he had even turned his thumbs upside down, smugly, and pretended to be cold as he stared back at the gazes of the tens of thousands of people blocked off by the walls of the battle room. He had even hoped that the gazes of those students from Yale University who only knew how to scold others would be as angry as possible, because the other side would not dare to fight anyway, so they would only have the right to be looked down upon by him. At this time, the main comms channel had already been shut down due to his scolding. He did not know that the countless people outside the battle room had already fallen silent, so when he heard the synthetic voice of the system inside his mecha announce that the battle request had been accepted, he was dazed for a moment, and only then did he remember to look at the third vision screen. He saw a black mecha, and also saw that black mecha's middle finger. Thus, Anda began his habitual frenzy and rage, preparing to use his mecha's thick and heavy mechanical arm to make an even more lethal gesture, but in the end, he found that the other had already charged over. Anda's blue-black mecha did not react at all, because in any of the mecha battle practice he had experienced, both sides would always have to exchange a few words out of habit. If they were not on good terms, they might still use machine language to express a few cordial greetings to the other's family, but there had never been anyone who would act like a shrew and immediately start a fight with the other. That black mecha had done just that, and it had done it thoroughly, silently and heroically pouncing over. While Anda was completely unresponsive, the mecha's leg kicked viciously at the base of the blue-black mecha's mechanical leg. Sneak attack! Shameless sneak attack! Anda cursed loudly in the cockpit, but he was completely unable to stop the powerful vibrations. The ringing in his ears caused him to be unable to control the mecha that was crashing towards the ground due to the momentary malfunction of the balance sensor. The blue-black mecha landed heavily on the hard metal floor with a loud thud. The powerful impact had been mostly neutralized by the ingenious shock-absorbing design of the mecha, and the tough training in the 1st Military Academy had also allowed Anda to dispel the dizziness in his head in the shortest amount of time possible. After confirming that his mecha had not received any real damage, he furiously and rapidly keyed in commands. As long as this blue-black mecha in front of him did not continue to act so shamelessly, he would definitely be able to turn the tables. Piloting the black mecha, Sulu was taken aback for a moment. Then, he believed that this seemingly cold and arrogant mecha before him was indeed a rookie. Since that was the case, why should he be polite? His fingers swiftly keyed in commands on the touch screen, and the mecha beneath him threw out a heavy punch, smashing viciously at the blue-black mecha's lower abdomen. Still at the position where the balance sensor was hidden, the black mecha's mechanical arm swung its alloy fist, making a strange turn in the air. Following the angle of the first kick, it smashed downwards at a 42-degree angle to the right of the mecha's front. One punch, one punch, one punch. The strong vibrations and the slight deviation of the balance sensor caused student Anda, who was angrily transmitting commands in an attempt to get the mech to retaliate, to be dumbfounded. This was because he found that every time he was about to adjust the parameters of the M37 mech, the opponent's fist would always interrupt the process of resetting the balance parameters. Amidst the crackling of electricity, the blue-black mecha kept trying to grab onto the ground, trying to counterattack, trying to stand up. However, as the black mecha's fists continued to fall, it displayed a tragic scene of cramping. There were many types of mecha duels. Under different backgrounds and environments, duels with different degrees of realism would naturally have different degrees of intensity. Today, the first military academy was visiting Pear Blossom University. Although they had generously shipped 3 mecha over and had also prepared an internal mecha duel performance, the mecha's long-range weapon systems had all been dismantled. The M-series prototype mecha Sulu was currently operating did not have any offensive weapons, so the battle between the two of them was actually the most primitive form of close combat. And it was very obvious that after being taught combat by Uncle Feng Yu for 4 years, Sulu was best at this aspect. In the past year or so, he had crammed in his basic knowledge at Pear Blossom University, and had found all the mecha blueprints for the first half of the M-series in Area H. Coincidentally, the last series of these blueprints was the M37. With his outstanding mechanical instincts and talent, as well as his rich practical experience, Sulu was incomparably familiar with that M37 mecha. Under his gaze, this blue-black mecha actually did not have those complicated and tough armor on the outside. It was more like a naked object with only an alloy skeleton and a control system. He had already gained the upper hand, successfully finding the M37's weakest link. Under these circumstances, if that blue-black mecha could still stand up, Uncle Feng would probably be so angry that he would be reborn from that beam of white light once more to come out and give Sulu a good beating. Sulu was a sinister person, but he was not born with the temperament of a hooligan. The opponent's perceived sneak attack was a very normal reaction in his eyes. Since the combat training had already begun, what was there to wait for? The blue-black mecha was already on the ground, so he naturally had to continue attacking until the opponent lost all mobility or until the system judged that he had won. Whether it was the level 6 virtual test in Area H1 or his nightly combat training with Tai Ziyuan, he was used to starting silently and ending peacefully. He had never considered the concept of a sneak attack. This was a very sincere, wooden, and stubborn attitude. Coupled with the nameless rage and gloominess he had accumulated over the past few days, it formed the ugly image of the black mecha hammering away at the blue-black mecha's thigh. The Black M prototype mecha's power output had already reached 80%. As the instructions entered on the touchscreen screen, it became the mecha's alloy fists that did not know exhaustion, gradually surpassing the sound of the wind. Meanwhile, under the black mecha's fists, the blue-black mecha trembled incessantly. It clearly had not suffered any irreversible damage, but it would never be able to stand up again, only able to be beaten up in agony. With a crisp crack, a small crack finally appeared in the armor at the base of the blue-black mecha's mechanical leg. The mecha's internal balance sensors could no longer withstand the torrential downpour of power, but also the stubborn precision of an old farmer. After a puff of green smoke, they officially stopped working. In the quiet combat room, the system's voice rang out. The Black M prototype mecha was unquestionably the victor. Sulu operated his mecha to retreat 5 meters. He still thought that right now, only he and the blue-black mecha opposite him were in the combat room. He had no idea that everything that had just happened had already fallen into the eyes of countless people. The cheers and whistles in the comprehensive gymnasium were already ringing out like a boiling sea. Only Sulu was completely unaware of this. The blue-black M37 climbed up pathetically from the metal floor. In the end, it completed the reset of its numerical values, forcibly interrupting the automatic posture adjustment program that the balance sensors were responsible for, changing the mecha's semi-automatic control to full manual control. This blue-black mecha finally stood up, but full manual control was equivalent to half a cripple in close combat. Small, dust-like curly hair floated in the mecha's cockpit, and at the same time, Anda's angry roar drifted in the air. He had never felt so vexed in his entire life. The opponent's operation level was clearly just a so-so. Other than the initial attack speed that had been frighteningly fast, the rest of it was just average. He even looked a little stupid, only knowing how to stupidly let the mecha punch him, not knowing at all that he should attack the more fragile and important parts of the mecha. But it just so happened that he did not know whether the opponent had gotten lucky or not, but the mecha's vibrations would always affect the recalibration of the balance sensors at critical moments, making it impossible for him to carry out any effective operations. Just like that, he lost to a prototype mecha operated by a student from a university. At this time, Anda even had suicidal thoughts. He gripped his own curly hair in agony, glaring furiously at that clumsy-looking black mecha. Of course, it's not a coincidence. Although this black and prototype mecha's operations are not all that great, no matter who is operating this mecha, to be able to attack 147 times in a row, including that initial kick with the mechanical leg, to be able to accurately hit the same spot, and all at the exact same angle, that can only mean that this person is very strong, very strong. Outside the mecha combat room, the people from the First Military Academy and the teachers from Yo University had two completely different expressions on their faces. Zhou Yu narrowed his eyes at the slightly sluggish black mecha on the screen, and said to those indignant companions beside him who had accused Yo University of launching a sneak attack on that mecha of theirs. We all know where the M37's biggest flaw is, but who would have thought of exploiting this flaw? No one, because the difficulty of operating this way is too high, although there is no long-range weapon system added in today's battle, making the possibility of the black mecha operating this way much greater. None of us can guarantee that every command we input will be executed accurately by the mecha. This requires confidence in one's own analysis of the brain, and also requires quick judgment of every angle change. A person without confidence would never choose such a stubborn battle method. A confident and strong mecha warrior. I now understand a little why the principal made us sacrifice our holidays to come to your university to perform. Looks like no matter where we are, there will always be someone worth learning from. The ace student of the First Military Academy's mecha department, Zhou Yu, smiled and walked towards the mecha combat room. Behind him, the shouts of the Yo University students in the multipurpose museum were like military orders, urging his footsteps forward. He knew that today's matter was Anda's fault from the very beginning, but as a soldier, in front of so many people, he had to ensure that the First Military Academy's glory would not be tarnished in the slightest. Chapter 93. On the screen, the door at the back of the mecha combat room opened, and a black and prototype mecha appeared. Countless gazes in Pear Blossom University's gymnasium turned towards it. Amidst their shock, the cheers of the students shook the heavens. They were not sure when their own school had mecha, and neither did they know who was inside the black mecha. However, they believed that this black mecha had stood up bravely for the honor of Pear Blossom University. Facing that arrogant idiot from the First Military Academy, just this point alone was enough for them to stop thinking about anything else. All they could do was dedicate their cheers and excited footsteps to that black mecha. And when that black mecha used a method no one had expected to kick down the blue-black mecha, followed by a series of clumsy and persistent punches, until finally the system determined the black mecha to be the victor, the atmosphere in the gymnasium reached an even more terrifying level. On the contrary, the cheers were much quieter now, because everyone was so shocked by this scene that they were almost speechless. Stars began to appear in the eyes of the female students, while the male students gaped, staring at the screen in disbelief. Meanwhile, the rostrum was filled with a deathly silence. The representative of the First Military Academy's exchange visiting team, Professor Chang, stood up abruptly and stared at the screen with a face full of shock. After a long while, he finally regained his senses and turned to ask the principal of Pear Blossom University beside him, "What's going on?" Other than the military academies, most universities would not have any systematic knowledge related to mecha. Although Pear Blossom University had some reputation in this area, this university did not have a motorized department, so how could they possibly have a mecha? And that student operating the mecha had actually defeated his own student. Although the combat strategy of the black mecha seemed rather underhanded in Professor Cheong's opinion, his doubts and shock made him unable to care about anything else. He stared fixedly at the unknown, wanting to understand how a university and society could have such a problem with mecha. It's just a prototype. The principal of Pear Blossom University smiled and said, "This was specially approved by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of National Defense over 20 years ago." Then, who's the student operating the mecha? Agitated, Professor Cheong quickly asked, "You should know very well that the Federation's laws clearly state that non-military personnel are not allowed to touch combat mechas." Principal Tsong's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but soon after, he smiled warmly and said, "Dean Chin sent you all here to conduct a mecha show. Those military officers probably don't understand the reason, but you should be able to guess one thing. Our Lihua Academy doesn't have a mecha faculty, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a mecha training ground. As for the identity of the person in the black mecha, I think that neither the Ministry of Defense nor the President's Security Committee will have any objections to him touching mecha." Professor Chong was taken aback for a moment, but gradually thought of a possibility. He turned his head in shock to look at the dazed black mecha on the screen and said in a trembling voice, "With his identity, how could he choose to appear in front of so many people? Don't forget, he is now our Lihua's student." The principal of Pear Blossom University continued to smile and said calmly, "Since a student from First Academy is here to visit and challenge Lihua Academy, and he is willing to come out and fight for Lihua Academy's reputation, I can't stop him, right?" Professor Cheong was stunned for a moment, and then a bitter smile appeared on his face. If the person in the black mecha was really that noble young man, then the First Military Academy's reputation would really be lost today. It seemed that the madam and the young man didn't like First Academy's plan to embarrass Lihua Academy and take back the right to educate the successor of the Tai family. The principal of Pear Blossom University noticed the bitter expression on Professor Cheong's face. He felt as if he had just eaten a piece of wild boar meat, but his face didn't show any expression. He looked at the black mecha on the screen and was secretly grateful to the disciple of his old friend for being willing to fight for Lihua Academy's reputation. Yes, the principal of Pear Blossom University looked mysterious because he thought that the person in the black mecha was Tai Ziyuan. If it was the successor of the Tai family fighting as a student of Lihua Academy, then the First Military Academy could only swallow their broken teeth. Principal Tsong naturally didn't have anything to worry about. This principal, who was busy with work, didn't know that Tai Ziyuan wasn't the only one who could enter the H1 area of this university. There was also a small gatekeeper that he had noticed before. The shock in the comprehensive library was replaced by cheers. The members of the First Military Academy's visiting team on the rostrum had ugly expressions on their faces. At this moment, the situation on the screen changed again. The blue-black mecha was lifted up and left, while a silver mecha coldly appeared on the field. The black mecha that was preparing to leave was stunned. Then, it turned around clumsily and faced the opponent. When the students in the comprehensive library saw this scene, they knew that the proud officers of the First Military Academy were preparing to issue another challenge. They all held their breaths. Principal Tsong frowned slightly and looked at Professor Cheong. He said, "Is it Zhou Yu? If he injures or enrages the person in the black mecha, do you think it's appropriate?" Professor Cheong looked silently at the screen and suddenly said, "Previously, we were just fighting for his performance. Now, it's the students who want to protect the reputation of the first school. Under this kind of premise, I won't stop it, nor am I willing to stop it. I believe that young man should understand that each school has its own pride." Principal Tsong didn't say anything. He just looked at the black mecha and smiled slightly. Su Le knew that the principal and the upper echelons of the First Military Academy were now treating him as the heir of the incomparably mysterious and noble Tai family. As usual, he silently finished the battle and then prepared to leave. Right now, he didn't feel too happy. He hadn't even completely vented all the negative emotions that had accumulated over the past few days. This young man was very sensitive and cautious at certain moments, but at other moments, he was a little muddle-headed. For example, right now, he kept thinking that he had just taken a short nap in the mecha. Right now, It was at most 4 or 5 in the morning. He kept thinking that this was just a warm-up exercise for the visiting students of the First Military Academy and that there were no bystanders, but he didn't know that right now, it was already 10:30 in the morning. Everything that had happened earlier had been seen by countless pairs of eyes and surveillance equipment. He didn't know that right now, Yale University had already become a sea of surprise because of his appearance, and he didn't know that right now, those excited students were all guessing who would be able to defeat the top student of the First Military Academy. He had already become a hero of Yale University, and a hero of the lonely and callous type. He didn't know anything about what was going on outside. He only felt that since the blue-black mecha was a rookie who was even worse than him, defeating the other really didn't count as much. He was still that pitiful fellow who could only last for 10 seconds at level 6. He had won by luck. What was there to be happy about? After all, he was just a lovelorn youth whose mood was still gloomy. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the system once again rang out with a synthetic voice. It was very clear: request for battle training. Do you accept? Su Le turned his head in surprise. The black mecha turned its head around clumsily, and then saw an exceptionally valuable mecha glowing with a silver light appear at the entrance to the combat room. It was still an M37, but there seemed to be some changes in its specific structure. He frowned and looked at the mecha that had issued the battle request through the holographic screen. His mood was very complicated. Could it be that these visiting officer students from the First Military Academy also want to play a tag team battle? He was exceptionally clear about his own mecha piloting skills, so clear that he had underestimated them somewhat in frustration. Looking at the steady and smooth trajectory of that silver mecha's advance, he subconsciously thought that he should not be a match for the other. However, whether or not he was a match was not the main point of Su Le's consideration right then. What he was thinking about was how to vent the gloominess in his heart. It didn't seem to matter even if he was beaten up by the other. This was not self-abuse, it was just the subconscious reaction of a young man with an ordinary personality. After accepting the battle request, he operated his black mecha and walked somewhat woodenly towards that silver mecha. That should be Zhou Yu in there. I heard that his younger brother went to the Westwoods Military Academy because he couldn't accept his older brother's excellence. Sitting on the sofa in the small villa, Tai Ziyuan's expression was rather strange. He naturally knew that this performance by the First Military Academy was meant to be a show for him to see, but he had not expected that things would develop to this point. He took a light sip of the champagne in his thin glass and looked at the image on the holographic screen with a half-smile. He muttered to himself, Su Le, you're in for it this time. The heir of the Tai family and Su Le would battle every night in the virtual system, so he was naturally very clear about Su Le's true strength. In his opinion, Su Le had been able to defeat that blue-black mecha in large part because of Su Le's trickery and that idiot's underestimation of his opponent. And now, since Zhou Yu was personally piloting the silver mecha into battle, what awaited Su Le could only be an incomparably tragic end. The mecha battle began. Just as Tai Ziyuan had predicted, the black mecha Su Le was piloting could not even hold up for an instant before that silver mecha. It was like a weed in a storm, swaying incessantly under the precise attacks, an existence that could fall to the ground at any time. With a muffled sound, the black mecha's translucent cockpit door was accurately struck by an alloy fist. Su Le was stifled by the powerful shockwaves. He stared somewhat blankly at the data displayed on the holographic screen and found that he had no way of avoiding the opponent's attack. Whether it was in terms of speed or control detail, he was on a completely different level from the opponent. It looks like I can only lose, Su Le thought with some boredom. His fingers continued to rapidly input commands, allowing the black mecha to avoid some critical damage. His eyes stared at that godlike silver mecha, filled with a sense of defeat and unwillingness. Chapter 94. The seemingly clumsy black mecha suddenly froze in its running path. The silver mecha that had followed it like a shadow did not let go of this opportunity. It slammed into the side of the black mecha, converting all the movement that the high-energy battery had given it into impact force. The collision of the alloy surfaces caused a very loud metallic sound to ring out in the combat room. Following the sound, the black mecha was sent flying like a kite with a broken string, crashing heavily into the solid wall. Although it did not shatter into pieces like a real kite, the structural fasteners and joints all made a whining sound as they moved, hissing as if they were about to stop working at any moment. The black mecha slid along the wall. Several parts of the alloy surface that had been damaged scraped against the wall, making a screeching sound that made one's teeth ache. At the same time, several fresh marks were left on the wall. In the end, it fell heavily to the ground, powerless. The power of the silver mecha's previous attack was fully displayed in this image. The cheers in Yale University's gymnasium had long since stopped, starting from the moment the mecha battle training started again. Then, following the continuous defeat of the black mecha, even the discussions about who was in the black mecha and the introduction of the most outstanding officer in the first military academy's silver mecha, Zhou, gradually stopped. When the black mecha slammed into the wall and slid down, countless people fell into the most complete silence at the same time. They watched the image on the screen with unusually complicated feelings. At this time, the rostrum had long since quieted down. The professors and officials of the two universities watched the screen quietly. Yale University, who did not know the inside story, had regretful expressions on their faces. They did not know which department this black mecha operator was from, and did not expect him to be able to consecutively defeat two strong people from the same department. However, there was still some hope, and now it became disappointment and worry amidst that disappointment. The expressions of the first military academy's side were much more relaxed than when Anda had been beaten up, but there was no smug expression on their faces. This was because, in their eyes, Officer Zhou, this young man who even the instructor of the mecha department had not been able to easily win, should have won easily. The principal and Professor Chuang, who thought they knew the inside story, who represented the two universities, had a completely different feeling from the rest. Professor Chuang knew that the honor of the number 1 hospital had been preserved, but the heir of the Tai family might not agree to transfer back to the number 1 hospital. Thinking about the dean's instructions, he did not feel happy at all. On the other hand, Principal Tsong was looking at the hologram with a smile. He thought to himself, with that young man's gentle appearance and arrogant personality, he should be able to clearly understand that if it wasn't because the training conditions in the H1 area were not as good as the first academies, he would definitely work very hard this year in Yale University. In the silent general gymnasium, everyone stared at the black mecha that was trying to stand up again on the screen. While the system had yet to announce the victor, this battle that seemed to have a great disparity in strength was not over yet. Everyone knew that the black mecha was no match for the silver mecha, but seeing that the black mecha showed no signs of surrendering, they could not help but be a little moved. No one knew who started it, but a very rhythmic applause suddenly rang out in the general gymnasium. At first, the sound was very soft, but later on, it attracted more people to join in. The applause gradually grew louder and louder until it was as deafening as a thunderstorm. Then, it found the same rhythm, and the sound of the rain became the sound of drums. Pa 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 pa, the sound echoed throughout the general gymnasium, cheering for the black mecha that represented Yale University and even the entire university town. In a corner of the spectators' stand, the son of the Linhai state representative, Hai Qingzhou, was clapping excitedly, his palms already red. Beside him, the naked Zhang Xiaomeng was looking at the hologram seriously, guessing the identity of the person in the black mecha. Although she was also a little worried for the black mecha, she was more calm than anything else. She believed in nonviolence and belonged to the moderate side of the Federation's opposition. However, they were still part of the same system. When she was in S2, she had come into contact with a lot of information about the battles between the Federal Army and the anti-government army. She knew that those mechas had mercilessly torn apart the bodies of those passionate and hot-blooded young anti-government army soldiers. When she saw the mechas, those bloody videos and pictures would appear before her eyes. In her heart, she had an innate disgust towards mecha battles. These emotions only flashed by, and Zhang Xiaomeng once again fell into her usual dazed state. Her eyes stared at the hologram, but she didn't know where her thoughts had run off to. Perhaps it was wildflowers, perhaps it was plain porridge, perhaps it was snow, or perhaps it was rain. Who knew? How could this naive and incompetent female spy know that the source of everything she was thinking about right now was actually on the hologram, right in front of her eyes? It was just that it was blocked by the exterior of the mecha, the applause that made people's blood boil like the beating of a drum, and even gave birth to a somewhat tragic feeling, fell into Shi Qinghai's ears. However, it only made the corner of his lips curl up into a mocking curve. He leaned against the wall of the tunnel at the very bottom of the viewing platform, raising his head to look at the hologram on the dome of the comprehensive gymnasium. He thought to himself with slight ridicule, the students were indeed a bunch of idiots with nothing but hot-bloodedness. Even that interesting fellow Su Lu had once displayed such stubbornness at the entrance of the nightclub. The cigarette ash between his fingers fell to the ground. Shi Qinghai closed his eyes, not noticing that the cigarette was about to burn his fingers. He replayed the previous attack from the silver mecha in his mind, confirming that even if the black mecha stood up again with incomparable strength, in front of Zhou Yu, it could only fall down once more. The intelligence should be correct. Other than that crown prince, no one else could enter Yue University's H1 area, which had never been made public to the public. The person sitting in the black prototype M mecha should be the target. It looked like that crown prince didn't have much talent in this area, but his temperament was still considered upright. Shi Qinghai opened his eyes, somewhat vexed as he thought to himself. If this crown prince was really the successor of the Tai family like the intelligence he had received from the organization a few days ago, why was he also so hot-blooded? The hot-bloodedness of such a big shot in his youth was definitely not good news for the anti-government forces he served. Sitting on the sofa, Tai Ziyuan was holding a cup of coffee. He wasn't the least bit surprised by the black mecha's performance. After so many days of interaction, he already knew that Su Lu had this kind of personality, and right now, he was the only one who knew who was inside the black mecha. He lightly shook his head, knowing that even if Su Lu regained control of the mecha, under the next wave of attacks from the silver mecha, he could only hold on for 6 seconds at most. Because the one sitting in the silver mecha was Zhou Yu, the one who the Tai family had been secretly observing for 4 years, the one who was destined to become one of their staff members in the future. Tai Ziyuan raised his coffee cup to toast Su Li's failure, smiling. The intelligent design of the Federation's scientists allowed the operator in the mecha to minimize the impact of external impacts. That was why Su Lu had not fainted in the black mecha's cockpit. But right now, he felt terrible. He swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva to stop himself from vomiting, and his vision finally cleared. He smiled wryly, subconsciously wiping his lips, and then his hands began to operate the mecha again, trying to get the black mecha to stand up. The lovelorn youth wanted to use a random battle, or perhaps be abused to vent the frustration in his heart that he had no one to talk to. He had already predicted the outcome of failure, and had even vaguely looked forward to being beaten up. However, when he actually began to fail, he found himself like a child in front of that silver mecha, unable to fight back at all. Su Lu subconsciously felt resentful. This was due to his personality. Having grown up alone, he possessed the tenacity, optimism, and unwillingness to admit defeat unique to Donglin people. He had never been used to admitting defeat without trying, and was even more unaccustomed to the slightly bitter feeling of defeat in his heart right now. Losing to an outstanding military cadet from the first military academy was something very easy for Su Lu to accept, but he could not accept that he had the thought of admitting defeat after that attack. In non-combat mode, the front end of the mecha's mechanical arms were all fitted with human-like alloy knuckles. When clasped together, they formed a powerful fist. The black mecha's alloy fist had actually been damaged quite severely in the earlier battle when it had knocked down the blue-black mecha. It was this damaged alloy fist that had propped up the floor, supporting the black mecha's balance and allowing it to stand up again. Su Lu had done this very naturally, but when it was displayed on the screen, it caused even more enthusiastic applause to ring out in the comprehensive museum. In reality, Su Lu had no idea how much applause was ringing out for him. He didn't even know that there were people watching this battle. He did not need applause for anything he did. The antique-level simulation system in the mecha's cockpit suddenly attracted Su Li's gaze. "You're very strong. I still want to learn from you." He opened the internal comms of the combat system and spoke very sincerely to that extremely elegant silver mecha pilot. Inside the silver mecha, the expressionless Zhou Yu finally showed a stunned expression. He glanced reflexively at his communicator and heard the other's sincerity and honesty. A trace of doubt flashed across that heroic face, but it was not because of the attitude the other was displaying right now, but because of the details he had captured from the data analysis in the previous battle. In everyone's eyes, the black mecha had already been utterly defeated in that short period of time. Inside the silver mecha, only Zhou Yu, the young prodigy of machine control, had keenly picked up on a trace of strangeness. At this moment, he had already confirmed that the person operating the black mecha was much slower than him in terms of hand speed and finesse in control. However, the problem was that the black mecha's reaction speed every time it dodged was always a hair faster than he had calculated. Being faster by a hair did not seem to be an important matter, but in the lightning-quick battle between mecha, it was extremely important. Although the black mecha's reaction speed was not fully displayed because it was not at a superb level of control, the problems in the data allowed Zhou Yu to confirm that the other's reaction speed was abnormal, even much faster than his own. He could not understand how the other had done this. Could it be that there really was such a thing as intuition in legends? In the silver mecha, after a moment of silence, Zhou Yu said seriously to the mysterious person in the black mecha who had stood up again, "Learn from each other, please." Chapter 95. The other had said please, so Su Le very naturally followed up with, "Please, wait a moment." It had to be said that even the same type of soup could produce a different taste of cabbage. This was the problem of the ingredients. The students of the First Military Academy were all very proud people, but the temperament this pride displayed was completely different. Piloting the blue and black mecha, Ndakue appeared frivolous and manic, while Zhou Yu appeared rather elegant. Hearing the voice in his ear, Zhou Yu smiled faintly. Looking at the black mecha that was barely maintaining its balance on the monitor screen, he said softly, "Okay." He did not know what the person in the black mecha wanted him to wait for. Perhaps it was to buy some time to rest, or perhaps it was to think of a way to defeat him. Absolute confidence allowed Zhou Yu to calmly and unhurriedly display the demeanor of a student of the First Military Academy. Meanwhile, inside the black mecha, Su Le really did seem to be resting. The mecha stood blankly against the wall for a long time, not making any movements at all. The long period of silence and the pause of the battle, as well as the strange atmosphere in the combat room, was displayed on the large screen of the multipurpose gymnasium. Finally, it was noticed by those students who had been clapping incessantly in the multipurpose gymnasium, holding their breaths and cheering for the black mecha. The applause gradually died down, returning to an incomparable silence. Everyone stared in surprise at the two motionless mecha on the screen, not knowing what had happened. Shi Qinghai was rubbing his scalded fingers together in boredom, his delicate eyebrows furrowed beautifully. Suddenly, his attention was drawn by the strange movements in his surroundings. He glanced curiously at the screen, and after a moment of silent observation, he guessed a bit about the exchange between the two mecha operators in the combat room. He could not help but laugh, thinking that at this moment, Zhou Yu would definitely give the other as much tolerance as possible to show his own demeanor. Sure enough, people from the First Military Academy were all so cocky. But what was that black mecha trying to do? The difference in strength was too great. Even if he continued to ponder in silence, the black mecha would not be able to defeat the silver mecha controlled by Zhou Yu in such a short amount of time. Unless that young master in the black mecha suddenly exploded with a mini-universe. In a small villa not too far away from the General Training Center, Tai Ziyuan was also holding a cup of coffee as he watched the silent battle between the two mecha on the screen with great interest. One of the two combatants was a friend he did not know about, while the other was his future subordinate. He was very clear about the strength of both parties and their personalities. He was all smiles as he prepared to watch Su Le fall and get back up, and then fall again. It was just like those hot-blooded space dramas that Lass from Department 23 had acted out. At this moment, the black mecha that had been silent for a long time suddenly moved. Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes. The people in the multipurpose museum watched nervously. Tai Ziyuan, who was in the small villa, smiled and drank his coffee. He bent his left thumb on the armrest and counted softly in his heart, 1, only 6 seconds. Tai Ziyuan believed in his judgment. Su Lu could only hold on for 6 seconds. In the second, the black mecha and the silver mecha collided violently once again. However, this time, there was no clear and heavy sound of metal clashing. This was because in that split second where the naked eye could not see, the two damaged mechanical arms of the black mecha suddenly moved at a strange angle to seal the front of the silver mecha. The silver mecha tore through the air like a blade. The right arm that was aiming straight for the black mecha's cockpit was blocked by the two damaged mechanical arms of the black mecha, which were even faintly emitting sparks. To be more precise, it was not a block, but a block. The angle between the two mechanical arms was particularly strange. They were radially outwards and just so happened to sandwich the silver mecha's mechanical arms in between. The silver mecha's attack caused the armor of the two mecha's mechanical arms to rub against each other incessantly, making a heart-palpitating sizzling sound. The tremendous force of impact was all concentrated in this area of close contact, causing the two mecha to tremble at the same time. They were sent flying a distance of more than 10 centimeters from the metal floor. Inside the silver mecha, Zhou Yu was rather surprised by the opponent's control precision and speed, but he did not find it particularly strange. This was because he had already noticed earlier that the opponent had a very strange reaction speed. His control should not have been so poor in the first place. The black mecha's clumsy movements were successfully captured in that split second. It no longer had to face the silver mecha's high-speed operation and nimble mecha footwork, thus concealing its own strengths to the greatest extent. This seemed simple, but in reality, it was extremely difficult. This was because the metal-powered nature of the mecha meant that the operator was destined to be unable to command the slightest movements of the mecha as if it were their own body. In mecha battle operations, there had never been such standard movements that resembled human combat. The black mecha retreated, using both arms to block. It was completely like a human who had trained in a self-cultivation hall for countless years, not like a cold and emotionless machine at all. The students who were nervously watching the screen in the comprehensive gymnasium did not understand the difficulty hidden behind this simple movement of the black mecha. They only found that the black mecha, which had been on the verge of collapse, had not only stood up, but had also successfully blocked the silver mecha's attack for the first time. This fact allowed them to see a sliver of hope for Lihua University's victory, and they could not help but erupt into a burst of enthusiastic cheers. However, Zhou Yu understood. Those students from the First Academy's mecha department understood. Shi Qinghai and Tai Ziyuan also understood. They could not help but feel somewhat surprised. Zhou Yu did not know how the person in the black mecha had been able to make a cold and emotionless machine complete that movement so smoothly like a human. Similarly, he did not know how the opponent could have a reaction speed faster than his own. But despite his surprise, this ace student of the First Military Academy did not feel a trace of worry in his heart. Calmly watching the various data feeds on the monitor screen, his eyes even flashed with a hint of a smile the fourth second. Another change. The two mecha, which had been locked in a stalemate, suddenly shook violently for a moment. The arm of the silver mecha, which had been firmly blocked by the black mecha, once again reached forward. The alloy fist, gleaming with a cold light, was aimed directly at the most fatal part of the mecha, the cockpit. Of course, in this sort of system-monitored battle, it was impossible to allow true death to occur between the mecha. However, if the silver mecha could really use some kind of power to strike the cockpit, the system would naturally judge the silver mecha as the victor. This was the source of Zhou Yu's calm confidence. Whether the black mecha's strange block had been done subconsciously or if it really had some strange control method, Zhou Yu did not care. The mechanical arms of the two mecha were entangled. The silver mecha had lost its high-speed mobility and seemed to be at a disadvantage, but in reality, this battle was completely a test of both parties' micro-operations in a small space, as well as the power of their own mecha's power system. In these two aspects, Zhou Yu was very confident. The black mecha was not a match for him. When it came to micro-operations, Zhou Yu's standard was far beyond that of the average person. Meanwhile, the silver mecha was an enhanced version of the M37, so its own power output was much higher than the M prototype, following the full output of the Jingnong-type's high-power batteries, the back of the silver mecha emitted an incomparably familiar, incomparably intimate hum. The powerful power output of the M37 allowed the silver mecha to advance once again, seemingly unstoppable. In particular, Zhou Yu's right hand continued to input commands on the touch screen, causing the silver mecha's mechanical arms to vibrate rapidly in the smallest possible range within 0.01 seconds, colliding endlessly with the black mecha's two mechanical arms. Knock knock knock. Like a woodpecker pecking endlessly at a sturdy tree, gradually loosening the tree, or like the hand of an ancient giant, continuously striking at the crevices in the rock, causing the crevices in the rock to grow larger and larger, a mecha's alloy mechanical arms would not tire, but under this sort of extremely small range of vibrations, there was no time to reset them. The black mecha could only watch as the crevice in front of it grew larger and larger, while the silver mecha's mechanical arms drew closer and closer, faster and faster. It had to be admitted that the mecha combatability of the ace students of the 1st Military Academy's mecha department was already at a very abnormal level. The 6th second. Tai Ziyuan's coffee cup paused by his lips. All 5 fingers on the sofa were already curled, his brow furrowed as he stared intently at the screen. That black mecha was on the verge of defeat, subconsciously feeling that something strange was about to happen. Zhou Yu also felt it, because the opponent's black mecha had not reacted at all in these 2 seconds, as if it had already lost all confidence. All it could do was wait to be hit and then be judged as a failure by the system. However, Zhou Yu was sure that the person in the black mecha was not someone who would admit defeat so easily. An ominous feeling appeared in Zhou Yu's mind. His expression was calm, but his fingers began to move rapidly across the screen, adjusting the M37's power output to instant strike. At the same time, he made the lower half of the mecha's mechanical legs begin to bend slightly to change into forward mode. The sound of electrical current and the sound of metal components coming together rang out. In the battle room, the trembling bodies of the 2 giant mecha seemed to freeze at the same time. The silver mecha's mechanical legs began to crouch, about to change into forward mode. Zhou Yu decided not to wait for that ominous possibility. He wanted to use this risky method to obtain more power output and ground grip in order to succeed in one hit. However, the black mecha, which had been silent all this while, seemed to have been waiting for this very moment. When the lower half of the silver mecha, Area 74C, shifted slightly to the back due to the mode change, the black mecha moved. Its thick mechanical legs moved, moving clumsily but decisively, becoming a black arc in the air. At a speed impossible to follow with the naked eye, at a precise 30-degree angle, it slashed viciously towards Area 74C of the lower half of the silver mecha. This was a scene that should never appear in a mecha battle. This was definitely a movement example that had never appeared in any mecha tutorial. The Federation's M-series mecha were all Form 2 mecha. The heavy mechanical legs were mainly used to support the heavy load of the mecha itself, but they could also be changed into forward mode. Through the reassembly of the metal components, the mecha could move swiftly across the plains at a speed of more than 100 km per hour. If required during wartime, tracks could also be temporarily installed to allow the mecha to smoothly cross those complicated swamps. All in all, in the Federation's mecha design and usage philosophy, the mecha's pair of heavy mechanical legs played a rather important role. However, this role was mainly reflected in the aspects of structure and movement. In battle, the mecha's balance was even more important. Only by maintaining the mecha's balance could the mecha's 3 major systems be guaranteed a stable reference and reaction platform, because the mecha's requirements for this aspect were too high. Whether in design or usage, the people of the Federation had always only installed the weapon systems on the upper half of the mecha. Very few people would have thought that those heavy and clumsy moving mechanical legs could actually also be used as offensive weapons. In the countless thousands of years of history, there must have been scientists or those strong pilots who had come from training halls who had considered whether the mechanical legs could play an important role in mecha battle. However, countless experiments and calculations had long proven that if the stability of the mecha was to be guaranteed, the flexibility of the mechanical legs would have to be sacrificed. After all, a mecha was a machine. No matter how nimble a machine was, it still did not have the body of a human. It could not be like those special forces soldiers or training masters, who could leap through the forest and kick like a human. Perhaps some beginners would enthusiastically attempt this, but what awaited them would definitely be complete failure. This was because a mecha that could not even maintain the most basic stability and balance, no matter how fancy it was to raise its legs, could only be blown to the ground by a gust of wind. In true mecha special operations, it was naturally possible to use the mechanical legs to perform some actions that one would never normally do. However, that would only be done when one was already cornered into a desperate situation, which was why one would use such an extremely risky method. The professors of the three major military academies and the Westwoods Military Academy's mecha faculty had long come to the conclusion that to control a mecha as if it was one's own body, the mecha pilot would need to have the computing speed and control precision of a computer. A high-grade central control computer might be able to complete these actions, but the computer itself would not be able to possess the natural reaction and judgment abilities of a human. Thus, the federal military's mecha teaching materials had never contained content on this aspect. This was because this was an offensive method that did not pay for itself. This was an offensive method that required countless failures before it could succeed once. In other words, this was a very stupid offensive method. Zhou Yu had seen this type of mecha leg attack before. In the first military academy's mecha faculty, there was a junior who was often whimsical but incredibly stubborn. That junior had once spent half a year's time attempting to make a mecha able to use the mechanical legs to launch an attack off the ground, while at the same time maintaining a quick response method under the opponent's counterattack. However, half a year later, that whimsical and incredibly stubborn junior had finally given up in resentment. Although even Zhou Yu admired that junior's talent, the consensus formed over countless years by the Human Federation was not something that just anyone could overturn. Thus, when Zhou Yu saw that black silhouette of a mechanical leg cleaving towards him with extreme precision and power from the monitor screen, and when the black mecha's main body still maintained its stability, its two arms blocking the silver mechanical arms still in place, Zhou Yu actually subconsciously paused for a tenth of a second, his pupils constricting abruptly. How had the opponent done it? Was it because half of the black mecha's body was leaning against the wall of the combat room? Or was it just a coincidence? Regardless of which it was, Zhou Yu would not actually feel panicked. This was because in countless mecha battles, there would always be some wondrous situations that would occur. And the next time, perhaps that pilot would not be able to use the same effect again. Zhou Yu himself had once unconsciously completed a beautiful roundhouse kick with his silver M37 during a mecha piloting experiment. At that time, he had been immensely excited. However, when he tried to repeat the process in the days after that, he found that out of a total of 14 experiments, he had only succeeded twice. Such a low success rate could not be used in actual combat at all. The cautious Zhou Yu had since then tossed this matter to the back of his mind. This was because he knew that with the control ability of all the pilots in the Federation, they would not be able to make an attack from the lower half of a mecha become an effective method. Thus, Zhou Yu believed that the black mecha had only suddenly erupted in a desperate situation, and had been lucky enough to execute this kick, just like his own beautiful roundhouse kick all those years ago. What truly made Zhou Yu feel immense pressure was the black mecha's reaction speed and calmness. The opponent seemed to have predicted all the developments of the battle from the very first second, knowing that the two mecha would definitely be in a stalemate. Meanwhile, the silver M37 would rely on its greater power to gain an irreversible advantage, while Zhou Yu himself would switch his mechanical legs to forward mode at the last moment to deliver the final blow. The black mecha's reaction was too miraculous. In that instant when the silver mecha had switched mode, it had found a loophole in the armor of Area 74C, and had immediately attacked that area. The opponent had been silent all this time. Could it be that it had been waiting for this moment? If that was true, this sort of forbearance, this sort of calmness, this sort of observation, and even this sort of gambling style of attack would make Zhou Yu feel an unprecedented pressure. A chill flashed through Zhou Yu's heart, but he did not have time to think further. His narrowed eyes flashed, and the strength of an ace pilot burst forth in that instant. His fingers brushed past the touch screen so quickly that the naked eye could not see them clearly. His left mechanical arm, which had been left empty all this time due to his elegance, suddenly shot forward. In a close-range battle between mecha without the firepower system, it was actually more like a primitive fight. The only things that were competing were brute force and speed, in other words, the power of the mecha and the pilot's control ability. At this moment, the black mecha's storm-like kick attack surprised Zhou Yu greatly. He needed to compete in speed with the opponent. As long as he could hit the opponent's cockpit faster than the opponent by just a hair, then he would still be the victor in this battle. The 6th second was finally over. Unsurprisingly, this kick of the black mecha's that no one had expected was like a poplar tree that had been uprooted by a strong gust of wind, or like a giant white wave that had struck the dam of Linhai province and then spat it out again. It accurately and heavily struck the lower half of the silver mecha's body, hitting area 74C. With a loud crack, the clumsy black alloy mechanical leg struck the area where the silver mecha had temporarily lost its defensive capabilities, leaving a shocking wound. Electrical sparks lit up the combat room. On the lower half of the silver mecha's body, countless metal wires and pipes were tragically broken. At the same time, the silver mecha's pair of mechanical arms had successfully broken through the black mecha's defenses, striking viciously at the black mecha's abdomen where the cockpit was located. With a series of crackling sounds, the translucent cockpit door was severely deformed, and web-like cracks began to extend endlessly. White smoke began to fill the combat room, obscuring all vision. After a moment of silence, the system's electronic voice rang out once more. It was a very straightforward and simple judgment. Same. The combat room fell into a strange silence. The two heavily damaged mecha had already left combat mode, facing each other silently. After the silver mecha's left mechanical leg had suffered that powerful blow, its structural system had been completely destroyed. The entire body of the mecha was already half-tilted, and it had lost all ability to move. A moment later, the silver mecha's cockpit door opened. Zhou Yu stared blankly at the thick smoke in front of him, as if he wanted to see the black mecha that was so close to him clearly. The black mecha's cockpit door had already cracked open inch by inch. However, the smoke-filled room made it impossible to see the pilot's true appearance on the other side of the smoke. Zhou Yu frowned slightly. In combat mode, the maximum attack power output was limited, especially the attack aimed at the cockpit. Why had the opponent's cockpit door been completely shattered? He did not know if the other person was fine. He was somewhat worried, but he did not know that the black mecha's cockpit door was a temporary backup that had been installed today. "Are you okay?" shouted Zhou Yu towards the other side of the smoke. After a long time, a few coughs came from the other side of the smoke and a voice rang out. "You're really strong. I thought that kick would hit you. You shouldn't have been able to hit me in time." Zhou Yu could hear the sincerity in the other's voice, and could not help but smile slightly. However, his smile was somewhat bitter. He had confirmed that the other was just a beginner, but seemed to have some kind of talent. He looked at the gradually dissipating smoke, frowning as he asked, "You're a student of your university? How did you do that kick just now? Do you want to come to our academy to learn some basic knowledge?" Zhou Yu had only said this subconsciously, but then he smiled and shook his head, saying, "Today, you've already become the hero of your university. I think that Principal Tsong will not let a talent like you leave." Their previous conversation and their current shouts through the smoke were all limited to the combat room. The countless people in the comprehensive hall could not hear them at all. The voice on the other side of the smoke suddenly became confused. "What hero? You don't know?" Zhou Yu looked at the gradually dissipating smoke in puzzlement. The air system in the combat room was operating at full capacity, and the smoke instantly thinned by a lot. The alloy ceiling in the sky slowly opened, and ear-splitting cheers could be heard from below. Sitting in the black mecha, Sulu watched all this in a daze. Suddenly, he cried out, and at the same time, the black mecha also began to move rapidly. As the smoke gradually dissipated, Zhou Yu heard the sound of electric current coming from the other side, and was even more puzzled. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the other's broken cabin door, wanting to see clearly what this strange fellow looked like, but all he saw was a pair of heavily damaged alloy fists firmly blocking the cabin door. The comprehensive hall was already filled with thunderous cheers. the students of your university and the other academies in the university town were all in a state of excitement. They never would have thought that the seemingly dying Black Mecha would not only stubbornly stand up, but even fight to a draw with the ace student of the first military academy in the end. On the rostrum, Principal Tsong, the professors and lecturers of your university were all very gratified. Even the leader of the first military academy, Professor Tsong, was very happy. A draw was the best result, at least they did not have to offend that young man. The ceiling of the combat room slowly opened, and the smoke gradually dispersed. Countless gazes were cast in that direction. Countless people wanted to know which department of your university student was sitting in the mysterious Black Mecha. No matter what kind of person this student was in the past, after today, he would definitely become a legendary figure that countless students would never forget. Principal Tsong smiled as he looked in that direction, thinking that tonight was the Double Moon Festival Ball, and the successor of the Tai family had chosen such an appearance a few hours in advance. Perhaps the heavens had arranged it better. However, what surprised everyone was that when the smoke dispersed, they only saw a heavily damaged silver mecha, and a black mecha using its alloy fists to block the cracked cabin door, turning its body around, and running towards the gradually opening door at the back of the combat room. No one could clearly see who was inside the black mecha. Even when the screen was zoomed into the nearest, there was still no way to see who was inside. This scene was engraved in the memories of many people, because after a soul-stirring mecha battle drill, they had seen the black M prototype mecha they had hailed as a hero clutching its abdomen and limping away like a shameless thief, fleeing in an incomparably wretched and terrified manner. Because of this scene, the comprehensive gymnasium instantly fell into an incomparable silence. Beside the passageway, Shi Qinghai opened his mouth wide as he looked at the back of the mecha that was running away like a dog. He suddenly cursed and hurriedly blew on his fingers that had been burned by the cigarette butt. On the sofa of the small villa, Tai Ziyuan stared blankly at the screen, thinking that if the black mecha were to act, it would definitely become a Nebula Award winner. This scene of running away while holding its stomach was so much like a pitiful person who had eaten something bad. Thinking of this, as someone of noble status, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of coffee, and almost laughed out loud in a manner that did not match his status.